Labdien! Tehniskās lietas ir atrisināts, visi esam palaiduši tiešraidē, tātad varam atklāt konferenci Korupcija, nacionālās un globālās drošības drauds. Un atklāšanas uzrunai dod vārdu Korupcijas novēršanas un apkarošanas biroja priekšniekam Jēkabam Straumem.
Labrīt, jūsu ekscelences vēstniekungi, godātie konferences dalībnieki, klātienē un tiešsaistē. Laipni lūgti Rīdzenes sarunās par korupciju. Rīt 9. decembrī pasaulē atzīmē starptautisko pretkorupcijas dienu. Jā, tiešais sākās. Es atvainojos. Tas ir piemērots laiks, lai atskatītos uz līdz šim veiktajiem pasākumiem, to efektivitātu identificēt gan šodienas, gan tuvākās un tālākās nākotnes izaicinājumus cīņā ar sabiedrības neredzamo ienaidnieku korupciju. Korupcija ne tikai latenta, bet arī grūti izmērām. Viena no korupcijas izplatības mērauklām ir korupcijas uztveres indeks, kas vairāk pētījumu apkopojumu atspoguļo tādu sabiedrības grupu izprati uztveri par korupcijas klātbūtni. 10 gadu laikā Latvijas šajā indeksā ir novērojams kāpums par 10 punktiem. Vienlaikus Latvijas pozīcijas pēdējos gados nav augušas strauji. Un šajā gadījumā gribas runāt analoģijās ar kāpšanu kalnā. Proti, jo tuvāk virsotnē, jo ceļš paliek grūtāks. Pēdējo 10 gadu laikā Latvija šajā jomā ir darījusi daudz. Piemēram, samazinājusi politisko partiju atkarību no ziedotāju, privāto ziedotāju makiem, izveidojusi ekonomisko lietu tiesu, ieviesos interešu pārstāvības atklātības likumu. Tomēr ar vienu mērķi sasniegt virsot, ka šajā gadījumā ir dzīve bez korupcijas klātbūtnes. Korupcijas izskaušana no tikai vienas valsts iestādes, tas ir korupcijas novēršanas un apkarošanas biroja, visas valsts pārvaldes vai atsevišķa nevalstiskā sektora organizāciju uzdevums. Tas ir vienlīdz atbildīgs uzdevums privātajam sektoram, kas ir arī Latvijas tautsaimniecības izaugsmes stūrakmens un arī iedzīvotājiem. Korupcijas novēršanas un apkarošanas birojas nulle pabeidza sabiedriskās domas aptauju, kurā noskaidroja iedzīvotāju un uzņēmēju pašreizējo attieksmi pret korupciju. Rezultāti liecina, ka korupcija sabiedrībā joprojām ir noturīgs fenomens, tomēr noraidošā attieksme pret korupciju ir salīdzinoši augsta. Piemēram, 70% iedzīvotāju un nedaudz mazāk 68% uzņēmēji norādījuši, ka nedotu vai drīzāk nedotu kukuli valsts amatpersonai, ja tas palīdzētu risināt problēmu jautājumus. Iepriecinoši ir aptaujā atklātā iedzīvotāju pieaugušā gatavība ziņot korupcijas novēršanas un apkarošanas.
People are more ready now to report.
To pastāstīt tikai draugiem vai ģimenei. Es esmu pret korupciju. Tas nav tikai lozungs, bet gan rīcība, aktīvi, skaidri iestājoties pret koruptīvām darbībām, mums apkārt un tūlītēji sadarbošanās ar tiesību aizsardzības iestādēm.
So, International Anti-Corruption Day, and I am honored to join this fight against this national threat. I wish concentrating in public with the NGO sector, Oliver Law and his lecture to strengthen the and also to fight the future challenges in Latvia and also internationally, and in Ukraine, which is torn by a war. Thank you for also the society and the Association Delna for co-organizing this event, USA Legal Department, Embassy of UK in Latvia, and KPMG Latvia. And I wish you a fruitful day.
Kā jau dzirdējām, arī Amerikas Savienība.
As we just heard, the Embassy of the United States of Latvia is supporting the
atklātību Delna, gan
conference,
citu,
including also Delna and other bodies that fight against corruption in Latvia. And now I would like to give the floor to the Ambassador of the United States of America in the Republic of Latvia, Christopher Robinson. The floor is yours.
Recording in progress.
Great. It's so good to see everybody this morning. Excellencies, colleagues, all the participants. I think the fact that you're all here and we have so many people participating online, honestly, it really inspires me as the ambassador that Latvia's continued commitment to fighting corruption remains very strong. So thank you for your participation today. And I also wanted to say a particular thank you to Director Straume and Executive Director Tauriņa for their leadership and continued leadership on this important issue. You've had enormous success. I thank you for your dedication to advancing Latvia's fight against corruption. So thank you. The United States Embassy is very proud and honored to co-sponsor today's event, marking International Anti-Corruption Day. It's a day that calls on all of us to reflect, to unite, and to reaffirm our shared commitment to fighting corruption. This year's campaign holds special significance, commemorating the 20th anniversary of the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. It's a moment to celebrate our successes, even as we recommit ourselves to continuing the hard work of combating corruption. The title of today's event, I think, frames this issue perfectly for all of us. Corruption is a threat to global and, frankly, Latvian national security. This is a point I made in my recent article in Delphi this past week, that we must treat economic security with the same urgency that we place on military security. Economic security includes addressing the vulnerabilities created when our economies are influenced by corrupt actors. Given the geopolitical challenges facing the United States, Latvia, and our democratic allies today, these efforts are more important than ever. I'm profoundly inspired by the strides that Latvia has made in its fight against corruption and money laundering. We've witnessed remarkable, incredible progress. The Latvia of today is not the Latvia of 2018. And I think all Latvians can be proud of this hard-won success. The United States has been proud to be your partner every step of the way. We've provided technical expertise and assistance and training to strengthen Latvia's law enforcement agencies, the judicial system, and regulatory bodies. In the past 3 years alone, our Department of Justice team, in partnership with U.S. law enforcement agencies, has organized over 67 workshops and training engagements for Latvian partners that have included nearly 300 prosecutors, 350 law enforcement officials, and 120 judges. Our two nations have worked closely together on joint criminal investigations, resulting in convictions in several countries. Our joint endeavors help us exchange best practices and intelligence to combat transnational corruption networks that threaten our security. Yet even as we celebrate Latvia's remarkable strides in combating corruption, we recognize that our collective journey is far from over. While Latvia today stands as a testament to strengthened institutions and resolute efforts to tackle corruption, we must do more. The timely conclusion of major corruption cases continues to pose a challenge, perpetuating a perception that some public officials can elude accountability. This erosion of trust between citizens and their government, frankly, casts a shadow on the progress that Latvia has made. Likewise, the many agencies detecting, investigating, and stopping corruption face stark personnel and financing gaps, even as the challenges grow. Furthermore, Russia's renewed aggression in Ukraine has heightened the need to defend ourselves against any vulnerability, whether military, cyber, or economic. The Putin regime is actively working to make Latvia fail in its anti-corruption efforts. Moscow seeks to exploit corrupt networks to create instability and opportunity in a NATO ally. Sustaining the momentum in the fight against corruption is not just an issue of good governance, but it is a critical component of safeguarding national security. Amidst these challenges, please know that the United States stands steadfast as Latvia's friend, partner, and ally. Our partnership transcends mere rhetoric. It is deeply rooted in shared values and a commitment to fostering transparent governance. That is something our adversaries can never match. This is the sort of robust international partnership that the fight against corruption requires. After all, transnational organized crime, corruption, and money laundering know no boundaries. Collaborating across nations is not an option. It is an imperative for all of us. Together, we have the collective strength to dismantle these nefarious networks with cooperation that transcends law enforcement and brings in government agencies, civil society like we have today, the private sector, media, and international organizations. These collaborations bolster our collective resilience against the evolving tactics of corrupt actors. We must also combat corruption at home. Let's keep working to strengthen oversight bodies and promote transparency through initiatives such as open data policies and whistleblower protection mechanisms. President Biden likes to say, democracy doesn't happen by accident. Likewise, the fight against corruption requires purposeful action. Your presence here today, and again, thank you for being here and participating, is an example of purposeful action. Each of you plays a vital role. Government makes law, law enforcement uncovers wrongdoing and enforces law, the financial sector ensures transparency, NGOs advocate for accountability, and the public vigilance holds us all accountable. I urge you to persist in your collaboration and advocacy as your work contributes significantly to creating a more transparent and just society, not just here in Latvia. Again, Latvia is a leader on this issue, and your effort contributes to our global efforts. Your commitment and efforts are pivotal in achieving our shared goals against corruption. So let me finish by taking this opportunity again to thank you and all your organizations represented here for your partnership with the United States in this shared fight against corruption. I wish you a successful and productive collaboration today and beyond. Paldies.
Paldies vēstnieku kungam un iepriekšējiem runātājiem. Ieteikšu sevi.
Thank you to Ambassador and previous speaker. Ambassador, head of CNAB, ladies and gentlemen, and everyone here gathered. We are gathered here before International Anti-Corruption Day. Rīdzene Hotel, of course, was not a choice, a random choice, because in Rīdzene or Rīdzene talks are also something that associates with a pivoting moment in fighting corruption in Latvia. But that is not enough. That's not all. And Delna work, Transparency International Latvia, a group in Latvia did find this association. And then the founders had a feeling saying that for 5 years we'll have something to do and then we will go over to next challenges. But here we are 25 years later. We have participants. We are also part of Transparency International, which operates in more than 100 countries. And I would like to ask and also reply to what previous speakers did highlight, is that why it is important to have a strong civic society in such organization and organization like Delna and Transparency International in the world. Because active community is a contribution in fighting corruption, a significant one. We are like dogs barking and watching over, supervising, and we need the community to retain the standards high and also strive to improve them, because everyday life sometimes is tiring, But then when we see what has been successful in our work, and also the previous speakers did mention such highlights, then we know that we need to continue our work. And so non-governmental sector, public sector, law enforcement institutions, various state institutions are the ones to take up the main role, not to allow for corruption to go through and to also impose penalties. And that is what we are going to talk about in the first discussion. And the third player is private sector. Several years ago in Delna, my colleagues and various partners told me that there are no companies in Latvia that are ready to say we are against corruption, even pronouncing the word corruption. But during the last years, the situation has changed. And in the second discussion, we are going to hear that the representatives of private sector are going to be sitting at one table and talking about what fighting corruption in private sector means. The data shows, as you know, for example, Corruption Awareness Index, Corruption Perception Index, is that private sector needs to take the initiative in their hands of fighting, and private sector, Delna also says this, and Delna has initiated the initiative Zero Tolerance against Corruption, and we do also seek partners who are ready to pronounce it loud and publicly. And so all the sectors and NGOs need to actively cooperate. This day needs to set an example where we sit at one table and 300 participants online, and we do talk about how we can do it better. And why today? And why these questions? I will be searching for one answer to a question: how each of us, how any organization, how any participants can do, what we can do for us to meet in 10 years' time and not to be talking about the same issues that are there and topical today. It is important for us to be goal-oriented and start this path for in 10 years, and maybe even in a year, we are able to say that we do continue and we develop even more the initiated changes and for the index to be different. Corruption as national and global threat. Well, that is exactly the same title as last year, but we decided that we will not change it because this is actually what is the most important. A year ago in this very same event, I said, and let me quote, I said, now, meaning also now, the democracy tries to strengthen their positions and mitigate the mistakes which we have made. Every country needs to devote the resources to fight challenges imposed by the corruption, including Latvia. Currently, even now, still there's fighting, war in Ukraine, and this is the price which Western countries may have to pay for the material interests and comfort. This is what I said a year ago. And I think that without a lot of changes, I could repeat myself and say the same. And so the third block in our conference, and Oliver Bullough, investigative journalist and author from the UK, he's going to tell about his research and the results thereof. And so we will then, this will clarify for us that this is not only some kind of theory I am talking about. So what are lessons of Latvia in fighting toxic neighboring countries and what other Western communities can learn from us? Well, sometimes we hear saying we are unsuccessful and we have done nothing, but let us look at what has been actually successful and what we can ask for other countries, for them to actually take our experience and use it right away as an advice and not go through it themselves. Are we going to find all the answers today? Well, let us see, but without further ado, then we can go to and start with fighting corruption, so to say. Well, actually, discussions and this conference, but once again, I would like to say, express gratitude to Embassy of the UK in Latvia, Treasury Department US, State Department US, and KPMG Latvia, and Corruption Prevention Combating Bureau, and also for these participants for for support in organizing the conference. So now we can switch the slides and head over to the next point on our agenda. One of the players in fighting the corruption is law enforcement institutions and non-governmental sector. Once again, what I wrote in the agenda is that this fight is not efficient enough. There are loud criminal proceedings, but they do not end with penalties, because we know that it is important to receive the penalty for it, because, well, again, this may be a factor showing that there's this fight. And what in 10 years? I mean, next discussion then, how to strengthen the chain and criminal proceedings in the fight against the corruption. This is Dean of Faculty of Justice in the University of Latvia, then is going to help us understand that. In any event, there should be technical. It's okay. Yes, microphone is on. Always yes. Thank you to technical department who has already started the microphone. Now, first discussion and participants of this discussion for us to begin. State Secretary Mihails Papsujevičs of the Ministry of Justice of Latvia. Prosecutor General Mr. Stukāns. Corruption Prevention and Combating Bureau, Inese Cīrule, Deputy Chair. Dear ladies and gentlemen, I am honored to host this discussion. We're going to be talking about a chain. A chain was like a keyword there, fighting this chain about these criminal proceedings. The chain of criminal proceedings, as we know, the chain is as strong as its weakest element. So there are two things for all these elements to even be connected, interconnected, and only then we can discuss for the chain to be strong enough. And previously, when we did announce this topic, we were asked to conduct this discussion with some insight into the past, or reflection on the past. We have to learn from the past, definitely, for us to securely look into the future and where we are now, what we do see, what will be the challenges in the future, and what we can, from today's perspective, know what are we going to do. Again, we'll say Rīdzenes talks and this, what happened in this hotel, and this is a symbolic place. And let us speak about what it was. Was it a bust? I don't think we can say that it was a success for us. And with Madame Cīrule, we actually discussed already before that it seems like it has been just a tale of reality, a story, what happened, and it reflects what happened during the last 10 years. And so the first question to our discussion panelists is several aspects. First of all, what is this like a brightest memory of the last 10 years in the field of corruption? What happened? Like, can you stress maybe something that was successful? Maybe you can say what has been a large challenge we have overcome in this criminal proceeding system, from investigation to also trial. So, Mr. Papsujevičs, then maybe begin. Yes, the mic is working. And then going through the park, and here there was Radio of Latvia also in Christmas markets. And unfortunately, the corruption perception index during the last 6 months, years has changed only several percentage points. And now what comes in our mind personally then, and also to as a representative of the population and as a specialist, I believe that the improvements have been in very minor corruptive cases. And so these minor changes were, for example, with the road traffic police taking bribes on the streets. And we do see that by technical means with electronic devices where you cannot, I mean, there have been attempts, but still this changed the situation. And now well, and actually people were also countering or fighting with these technical means. I mean, this is the first thing that comes to our mind, but these big fish or the large corruptive events, well, still Latvia is receiving the criticism for that. So, and then there were changes with the war in Ukraine, of course, waged by Russia. And here everyone and professionals too believe and understand, and now understand how big and how detrimental it is if in state structures and in justice system of the state, this corruption is so much integrated everywhere. And it is like the title once again of this conference is this is the threat to our national and global security. That is the first thing that comes to my mind talking about it. Mr. Stukāns, maybe you can then continue. Is it a bigger, has this threat become bigger, and maybe any busts or success stories? I think it's actually less of a threat today than previously, because economically we have grown. And I will not even tell you now where we were 10 years ago. I think I was a judge, and I remember my salary was very small. Then I went away, then I returned to this occupation. But now prosecutors and judges shouldn't be crying, so to say, because, and if anyone believes they might be corrupted, then they have to leave. There's no other option. And if something or anything has changed during the last 10 years, then what has changed is that KNAP has gained more experience, and also in the world.
Tehnoloģijas, kuras nodrošina varbūt lielākas iespējas
Everything
kaut ko
develops and there are new technologies, and we can then establish that, but
un nauda. Un līdz ar to visu mūžu bija
corruption is always a human being and money, and so it's been like that always, and this money has always been significant, and this is us people making these decisions. If we are talking about road traffic police, is it actually a big problem if they are not being paid and say, well, you actually have to survive and you will earn on the streets, and this is what they did. But now, if we talk about the service in internal service as such, or state service, if the country, the state, is not paying the remuneration that corresponds to this field and to the realities in the country, then there is a corruption risk. And we need to think about these aspects. We need to think about aspects of the security. And so for the security not to be even possible, the public officials need to think in this direction. And here we have opportunities to evaluate and also to involve in large projects, in large processes where there's a lot of money, and so in Latvia is not that big, and we know who are the decision makers in Latvia. And so the services need to find a way how the respective information to obtain this information and strengthen it with the evidence and use it, and what to do with it. So corruption, in fighting corruption field, it will be always important to understand nationally that we need appropriate resource, human resource, financial resource for services or respective service to be able to fulfill their services, their duties. And we need to know that we have strong service. And I hope then public state officials are going to think twice before doing something. To do it, once again, we need to investigate and prove and just be committed to our work. And so, thank you. This was exactly the idea, being like, what is the first to do when something is, when we reveal something? And then, as I said, this chain is as strong as its weakest element. Then, how do we begin? The first element of the chain, what is it? The question then to Madame Cīrule, and in investigation, looking also back and up to today, because we will also speak about the future perspectives, but what has been the most difficult so far that has promoted this fight, this combat? If we look back, then I have to say that previously people did not report such crimes so much. Now we have law, we have regulations in place to defend, to protect the whistleblowers. And previously, it was comparatively or even actually easier to investigate the corruption cases because everything was solved by means of money in ways like being present and actually transferring the money. But today, most corruption takes place in virtual environment. And this is what we can talk about in the next part of the discussion, because this virtual environment is definitely going to be a challenge for investigation. And yes, so investigation has become more difficult, and corruption has no borders anymore. It is everywhere, ever present in all the world. And so the speakers also did note this and then said about this future vision, what actually we can anticipate in the future. But 2 points, I mean, state not caring enough for state public officials or specific state public officials, which otherwise would be, and in this case is actually an incentive to involve in corruptive activities. But another conditions, among them being this digital environment, it will be challenged in the future. But at the same time, do we see like the solution? I mean, with salaries, we can all say that we see the solutions, but will the politicians actually believe the same, that the policemen and the investigators need to receive decent remuneration? So here also in the introduction speech, we heard that this community, and society, how they perceive. We're talking about long procedures, trials, but actually, is it true? And are the penalties just too mild? Because community once again wants to see maybe more. And what about the penalties as such? Are they not, well, and proceedings too long? Maybe sometimes there's not even a result without some objective reason being, and virtual environment, how is that going to impact us in the future? So maybe in the same order, you can say.
Considering punishments, maybe I will not be popular by saying this, but what concerns severity, I would rank it at number 2. Because what is the most important is that someone is caught. If a person who commits any crime, including corruptive crimes, if this person is convinced that he will never be caught, then this is a very, very significant problem. This is not a future challenge. This is a today's challenge. And this is something that investigative bodies see, for example, in the virtual environment. It will be very difficult for us to continue in this regard, and so it's good that we cooperate with international partners, and this is a huge challenge. We, of course, cooperate what concerns investigation and also evidence. The punishments should be commensurate, proportional. If someone is caught and investigated and prosecuted, and then this person would balance the severity with the crime. But if someone is convinced that I will never be caught, then it's meaningless to speak about the severity. I would also like to underline another aspect. You mentioned that it is very important how the links of the chain are connected. In my mind, it's very important to invest in education of all 3 links and how we assess specific evidence, which evidence is admissible and which is not admissible, which is supporting the prosecution and which is not. And we have quite good examples what concerns direct evidence, and also in cases of money laundering. We have come together and we have discussed specific cases and we have arrived at common understanding. So this is one issue that we need to focus on also in the future. We should strengthen it in all three links of the chain. And when this bridge is built for all these sections to be connected, I believe that the ministry, together with cooperation partners, prosecutor's office and the Supreme Court, they are currently creating a judicial academy that will be a good investment in the future that will allow to achieve this. I would like to begin by saying that corruption prevention and fight against the corruption office, I think that we need to prevent rather than fight, so that people even didn't get this idea that they could do something. Prevention would be much more economical than investigating these crimes later. What concerns corruption, both parties are interested. Thus, this is one of the most complicated crimes, because the respective services, respective agencies, also considering the human rights principles, should be able to investigate this and to establish and document the evidence. But what concerns corruption cases, we have to ask ourselves why there is corruption? Because someone wants to enjoy the nice life. And if the money is not used, then corruption is meaningless. We should look also at what has been discussed before. I don't know if it's going to continue, but we, let's say, have border. There are border guards, there are customs officials. Everyone sees how they live, what is their lifestyle, but they continue to work, continue to live in the same way. But the state continues to ignore that. The salaries are small, but they build huge houses. So we have contacted the respective services, have started doing something. We have charged more than 30 customs officials. So there are positive trends. But the proceedings are quite lengthy. Yesterday, I had a sort of a present for Christmas. For 20 years, the state has not been able to complete a criminal case related to signing one agreement. So what are we talking about? When this case started, I was a judge of the first instance. I, of course, cannot reveal details, but when this is finalized, I think the professor should look at this case and at least theoretically try to establish what has happened, why we were not able. Of course, at that time it was more complicated, but it's not rocket science. We still are unable. If we speak about investigation or pre-trial phase, all corruption cases, and there is another case where I was involved, the president of the Latvian Railways. His salary, I think, was the highest of all Latvian officials, still taking bribes. I didn't mention the surname, so we assume that took bribes because the sentence is not final yet. During the first instance, he was exonerated because they were completely lost in the facts of the case. But there, the amounts are totally different. It's millions, and it has been recorded and documented. But still, the state is not able to ensure a reasonable time. I don't know what is going there. The pre-trial phase was not really long, but in the court, it's totally different. We have to think about that because the public wants to see the result. And a result
Šobrīd,
that
diemžēl,
is
visi
quick is also a factor that dissuades someone. And not even speaking about this digital case that we had, because some of the involved parties have already passed away. Yes, as if we have all the elements, but I think this human maybe element prevents us from achieving good results eventually. Thank you. We will use this wide interpretation of corruptive of the definition of what is corruption. So in these cases, as you said, both parties, they are interested, but the public suffers. So as the victim, the public wants to see just case, just result. And these cases, they are too long, nothing happens, or the severity of the punishment is not severe enough, or maybe there are some other opinions. Ms. Cīrule, in investigation phase, do you believe that this phase actually contributes to the problems like lengths or maybe cases that have not been solved? I will reiterate, but I think that the public, from all of us, expect that if there are suspicions voiced about illegal activities of one or the other person, they want quick results, quick investigation, quick finalization of the case. And we see that the cases are dragged for years. And what concerns investigation, small corruption cases can be investigated quickly in cooperation with prosecutor's office, are forwarded to the prosecutor's office and then to the court. I don't think there are any problems there. But what concerns these huge cases with many judicial assistance requests to other countries, even further than the Baltic states. Yes, in the Baltic states, cooperation is great, but considering the geopolitical situation, judicial assistance requests are very rarely answered from the countries that used to be in the Soviet Union. So this will be a future challenge, how to establish this network and how to have these acquaintances or these good contacts, and this could be a solution. Maybe to complete our discussion, I'll be slightly provocative. So if we speak with prosecutors, judges, and investigators, and also with the lawyers, solicitors, and barristers, and if we ask them, like, what has changed during the last 10 years? Is it better or is it worse? And there was a long answer that I received, but if I summarize it, then we could conclude that the willingness now matches the ability, because of late the ability has improved. And then there was also a mentioning of the purpose and means, because the aim, the purpose has always been noble, but now the means have also improved. Do you think that it is well warranted when someone says that, yes, the goal was noble, but the means maybe didn't really ensure this rule of the law, and that's why we have these long cases? Of course, the parties could act in bad faith, but or you think that it has never been like it was described? I think to some extent the question already provides an answer. If we look at the last 10 to 20 years, yes, the law has been improved. We also try to apply international recommendations and legal acts more diligently. We also build our case, and we also work with various international partners and various agencies. We bring them here to share experience, and I think together all of that gives the desired result, but maybe not as quickly as we would wish. And this is something that we definitely need to continue. For example, we already spoke about digital challenges. We will not be able to do that alone. This week on Monday, on the Judicial Council, EU Judicial Council, there was discussion about legal matters, including corruption matters and also third countries. So how can we receive evidence from these countries? This is a huge challenge that we will not be able to solve alone. We have to work at various levels, and we have to continue assessing our practice and our law and improve as needed. We have to skillfully apply during all stages of the proceedings, and we also have to work at international level with our partners, not to lag behind and to continue fighting new challenges. Maybe at the end, I would like to mention one word: openness. We have to invest efforts to make sure that officials act openly, and then we will be able to understand what is going on. Second, do everything possible to prevent to prevent money laundering. If this ability or if this possibility is prevented, is not allowed, then there won't be any motivation to take bribes. So we all together need to find new ways, new means to considering the current situation, technological, economical aspects, a lack of borders, to make sure that corrupt persons cannot really enjoy their life. From my side, at the end, I would like to say that we have to educate our youth. We have to invest in the youth because they are our future. Because if a person is not ready to give the bribe, if they know that they may be prosecuted for that, then the investigator and prosecutor's office will have less work in the future. And I think we will have always something to do what concerns criminality, but of course we would like to reduce the scope of work, and the youth is the stage where we have to invest, so that in 10 years when we meet again, we could say that we have been successful in our fight against corruption. Thank you to the panelists. We still have a few minutes. At the beginning, dogs were mentioned. The dogs are barking or guarding, and we know the saying that the dogs keep barking, but the caravan proceeds. So maybe one last comment. From whom would you expect the greatest support? Of course, we can say that we are dogs, but in the good sense of this word. How can we ensure that the caravan would not proceed, and that we would perceive this dog not only as someone who barks, but also someone who guards? So, do we have to work with politicians or laws or grant more financing or the public? What could be this key assistant in your work? Very simple answer. Everyone, personally, was Miss Cīrule mentioned what concerns the youth, speaking with the youth and forming our attitudes. If I don't take bribes and if I don't need that, people would not come. Now, of course, they can come and offer, but I know what to do. If we have the zero tolerance against corruption, and if we have zero tolerance to this approach in general, if that is a principle that guides someone, then we are supported and we have solved the problem. Of course, it sounds utopian, but this is something where we need to invest. Thank you. I would like to invite NAB and other bodies to think about closer cooperation with businesses, because they have this money that is used for these crimes, and if businesses don't give, then there will be nothing to take. And I definitely agree that education and awareness raising is something that could be considered a keyword. If someone just totally dismisses the idea that he or she could give a bribe or take or use other legal means, then this problem would be solved. Like they need to call, they need to inform, and we also have to focus on critical or risky matters that could contribute to criminality. Of course, we speak at homes and so on, but the public actually is very dissatisfied that these corrupt officials are not just imprisoned for many years. And the final comment, speaking about investigation as the first stage, undeniably, the prosecutor's office will be the greatest support to investigators to ensure that specific cases are moved forward and that we ensure quick and efficient progress of the case. But in general, the fight against corruption depends on each of us. Thank you. Our time is up. Thank you to the panelists. I think we laid the foundations for the next panel discussion on the importance of private business in this area. Thank you.
Tieši tā, kā jau mēs esam iepriekšējā sarunā identificējuši, tad, protams,
as we just heard during the previous discussion, there are several players in this game, and according to the Corruption Perception Index and Latvia's results, and having analyzed these results in more detail, Delna has concluded that the belief that the private sector is convinced that there is corruption here, that actually undermines our standing in this regard. I will repeat myself again, but I want to say once more that the private sector has to take on greater responsibility for lowering this corruption index. We cannot just expect that NGOs or someone else will be actively fighting against that. And now I would like to give the floor to Evita Goša, Schenk Latvia member of the board, who will also introduce other panelists. Thank you. I will invite all the panelists to sit down.
Cīņā ar korupciju. Un kā jau tika pieteikts, tad mēs šajā diskusiju panelī esam sapulcējuši.
And as said, in this panel, we are going to analyze the role of business in fighting corruption and preventing corruption. And we are going to address not only private and public sector interaction, but we're going to be speaking about corruption in private sector specifically. And in Latvia, we understand by that the commercial bribery. And here, what companies are doing now, what should they be doing? And yes, that is what we discuss with the Ilza KPMG Latvia and Sustainable Services Consultant, Vilnis Vikovskis, State Joint Stock Company in Latvia, Chairman of the Board Latvijas Valsts Ceļi or Roads of Latvia, and Amber Group CSI Latvia, but unfortunately he fell ill and he will not be able to participate in this discussion. So we wish him health. And as Inese said, I am Švenk Latvia, which is a private foreign capital company representative. And here the question is to both of you. Why is it important for companies to combat the corruption or counter it? But previously we have already, well, there were some ideas, but now maybe briefly from your part. So I may begin now. It is easy for me to represent KPMG in this discussion because as it joined, so in their code of there was a rule of zero tolerance included already in their code, and I wanted to say that the corruption, unfortunately, is very expensive, and also internationally, the UN has calculated that these are trillions. Approximately 25% is believed to be then directed towards somewhere else, not for intended purpose, meaning they are not invested in healthcare, in education, and as a result, it costs us a lot. And it's very expensive. And also the price of the corruption is indicators as a result of corruption, how money is lost in Europe and how money is lost, well, in Latvia. And so this answers the question why the companies should care. Because we usually say, for example, or we say public sector does not invest in various fields, but it doesn't go to the recipient intended also. And so there was a comment. The reply or the comment from my part is that if the company wants to work in the long term, in the long perspective, if they want to be efficient, if they are introducing various digital solutions, then there is no way, there should be no corruption in the company. So there's just no place for that. And then accordingly, next question is how exactly your private entity and what your company does in order to ensure not involving in corrupt practices. Are there some kind of trainings, some management systems, supervision systems? How would you characterize it? In our company, Latvia Road Maintenance Company, how we began, there was the initiative of zero tolerance against corruption, and I think this is what it's called. This is the precise name of it, and actually it is of practical and psychological significance, and we internally and also externally communicate our values and the solutions, and apart from that there is also well, an array of policies, anti-corruption, or fraud policies, ethics policy, good management policy. There are action plans, risk management, and accordingly, all the situations we have seen and we do see, we identify them, discuss, and it is important for that if you don't speak within the company about it, and there are interpretations allowed, then, well, again, I would like to say, if we talk in similarities, then it is very important that the company has some kind of like a cover, like a shell, like a sphere for the planet, which is bulletproof, meaning all the measures, attitude, and values. First of all, if there is such a shell and such protection, there will be no desire for people to get close to our company with any corruptive initiatives. But if they even have them, they will get stuck on the way. If there's no particular person in the company, like person X in the company, which is known for that we can get something through. And this is also for management of the decisions. And most probably, if there is this desire, this will not go through. Just as simple as that. And if something actually goes through, with this very little chance, then it will be actually reported. There will be signals and there will be notifications, and I think that there is a rather high possibility that we will then eliminate the risk or situation inside. As this discussion is actually intended to be very practical, we're not speaking about what to do or constantly what only to do, but with practical means is that I have one clarifying question is about political systems. That's all good and clear. Of course, it's a way how to ensure that the company and its employees do not get involved in corruptive practices and maybe other activities. But the question then from my part is that how really to ensure that all the employees of the company do understand these policies, that they are motivated to comply with these policies, and they are convinced that it all goes to the core. So it's just, but because we have heard people say like, okay, we have some kind of declaration, some kind of codes and something, we read it and it takes as if we undertake something, but actually we're not signing anything. And how actually and how really can we make these systems such that all the employees have like this spark in their eyes, standing for these values and not allowing any corruptive activities? Of course, I am only speaking in the context and on behalf of my company, but maybe these policies and plans and like within this company, it's rather practical, but this is also informative, and this is also trainings, and this is also controls, audits, planned, unplanned, and definitely this is like defining the rules of the game and why it makes sense or why we should be working, being and be honest. But practices are different. Like we have ethics commission, of course, in place, and it's been working, and it's no secret that we have had some events or also in our company, and we have communicated about these, and it is rather convincing rhetoric, and we have been able to communicate also that. And do you really want it? Is it really worth it? This is how we, well, not ended the discussion, but ended with these questions. I mean, but if there really is something, just let's go to the police. There was a search. Let's go to the police. Yes. And do you want this to be seen by your family, neighbors, colleagues? Really, it is important to just address this situation, tell about these different facets and consequences, and be able to know and also know what actions to do if we all want to work and for a long time and be in this company. Then it's better to choose the path of being and acting in good faith. So what KPMG does? What KPMG does, I will now say, and what was also mentioned in the introduction, is that the strict business culture that is implemented through codes, through internal procedures and control mechanisms, and through reviews, we are following that the corruption risk is being eliminated absolutely, fully, completely. We're talking about also not only the possibilities of the corruption to occur, but also we're talking about the perception, and if there is some kind of shadow of doubt of possibility of involvement in corruptive activities. So next step is for our company then is also involvement in the conferences like this of today, understanding how important it is actually and what is the price of the corruption. And the third is that we do help through our work to our clients, to other companies, to sort out the procedures for the corruption risk to be then reduced, eliminated. So one thing that was mentioned is that the corruption is like the opposite. It's like thinking short-term thinking. It also goes hand in hand with new tendencies and proceedings and regulations. Ever more in the agenda of the companies, it is visible, and through our work, we not only improve our practices, but we help to also ensure such practices to others. That's right, that's clear. And actually, it would make sense now for you to comment as a representative of the company, is how overall and globally you see, once again, how do you see it globally? And what is the best practice examples now internationally? What to introduce in the companies, how to act to be as efficient as possible in preventing various kinds of activities, including corruptive practices. So here, once again, I would like to just note about the Scandinavian example is high trust in society, well-being indicators are high, but once again, we are talking not causality, but correlation. Little corruption tolerance in the index is it goes in hand with these, like correlates with this growth and well-being. So the society trusts, members of society trust each other. Nobody allows this thought of corruption. If we cannot introduce this culture rapidly, then we need to start with the procedures. And exactly what was mentioned, that these mechanisms, first of all, these are the particular trainings, and it's also important for them to be communicated from the top levels down, and we do not tolerate it. It has to be a clear message that we do not tolerate any corruption. And trainings too, it's not just one member joining the company once or maybe having these ad hoc trainings, but actually there has to be procedures in place for regularly talking about, and maybe some activities that cannot be explained, and something else, like different topics, to cover different topics and over the course of time, and regularly conduct the trainings. And also increase the responsibility for implementation of the zero tolerance principle, as said. And so there are internal mechanisms that do allow for following these questions. Vilms, you can also continue. Yes, I do agree the top-down approach. I would even say starting from the supervisory board, but actually this is talking about the society in general, then it is important also that the supervisory board does communicate that they are zero tolerant to the corruption and corruptive activities. And the next thing is then the management board, or the next level is, and educating it for the competences or knowledgeable or competent. This is a very good tool in combating the corruption, because, well, as simple as that, knowing it, or knowing, for example, competition regulations and laws, or knowing the criminal law, administrative law, then it's clear, because you see this landscape, and you can explain the situation, and well, strive for also the best possible result. Well, exercising the privilege of being the host, I will also gladly share what my company does, not only in anti-corruption field, but in general, what we do for not allowing any illegal activity. Then ESG in this management, then this is, once again, this is a zero tolerance against any violations. This is like a leading motive, and ethics code is not a declaration, but is a binding document, similar to as it is rules of the agenda, which is annexed to the to the labor contract. This is what we internally also call disciplinary code, is where it is clearly said for what kind of violations, what kind of disciplinary sanctions are provided for. And in the worst case, if it's in the worst case, we can terminate the agreement. And only then, when it's with such clarity explicitly explained, then, and what we have all gathered for, then we understand why we are here and all together. So this is, and what is the culture also of the company? The ethics code. It provides for the large principles, competition, human rights, labor rights, environment regulation, including all this important field for us and the scope of fields. So definitely, again, not a coincidence that I asked how to implement this all. It should not just remain as some kind of a tick in a control list. We just say that in the checklist, everybody says, okay, fine, we have all the, well, papers in place, but it's important how the employees work and how they experience through themselves, how they live with the values proposed. And so for our company employees, with 360 of them, it is a practical exercises, no more than 10 in the group. Everybody participates, from management board, chairperson. We do not have supervisory board, up to the person doing the simplest of the tasks in the factory, in the warehouse. So everybody needs to participate. It's not just talking head like right now and today, but and all of its occupants, but it's like an ethics dilemma, solving them. Not just talking about ethics code, but once again, with some applications. So adopted environment in our business, dilemmas and solving them, which is not just black and white, which are complex, difficult situations, but at the same time, very much related to the business and also very practical. So through that, we do indeed promote that the employees, it's not even like an option for them not to experience it, because they are participants of these trainings. They are experiencing it and letting it through them. So identified groups of employees to whom we believe it is important to know even more in the field of combating corruption. Of course, we then do conduct also in-depth various trainings. We define it as being intended for any employee who has some kind of interaction with third parties, meaning it's our partners, public sector, maybe vendors, suppliers. So there we really identify the scope of issues where in-depth knowledge is necessary. So, and this is how we also promote us all being united. We are all equally responsible. One thing, for example, is this legal liability, which is then again borne by the management board. In case of problems, we would solve it on a different level of how much they should have known or should not have known. But in this from this general perspective, this is like a solidarity also, in encouraging the solidarity in our company. This is our company, this is our values, and this is what we stand for. Again, being of utmost importance. So it doesn't really matter if we talk about public organizations or private entities, as just said, like in the discussion, this is our life. This is important to us. This is how we spend our lives. The previous session, there we spoke about how the corruption proceedings are going to be reviewed by the law enforcement. But now I'd like to take it to our micro environment in the business entities. How is that we go through and so much in detail through these proceedings and events that has been on the border. is it identified in the companies, and are there any consequences then related to that? Because in some, this like our overall perception of the corruption perception, once again, index. So if they are not receiving any penalty for some kind of activities that would, are believed to be corruptive, then this legal nihilism then only strives and develops, and this is also transcedes to the state level.
I believe it's important that this liability should be integrated in the entire company. It's not just a board. For example, I can share some practical examples of something that has become a turning point to us in the mindset, in the attitude. Like, there is this tree somewhere lying at the side of the road. Let's just pick it up and saw it and chop it and use it for heating. But you are not allowed to do that because that is not your tree. It is owned by Latvian State Forests or someone else. Or another example, let's say there is an event in Munich. We are invited to go along with someone who has promised plane tickets, but no, we are not allowed, even though we will save money. And we have quite many such examples. We are a state-owned company, and the owner defines its requirements. And how can it be that I cannot wash my car, for example, in the company garage? No, you cannot. You are not allowed to. And this is what we need to go through. And we have to make sure that everyone agrees to this approach, starting from the roots, or starting from the very lowest level to the very highest level in the company. A practical example how we can illustrate systemic anti-corruption practices. For example, commercial bribery was just mentioned. So how we do the business in B2B segment. For example, there is clear definition that gifts and events are also risky, and the company has clear threshold when a gift becomes inadequate or unacceptable, where this assumption of affecting the decisions of the other party could be perceived, could be made. So this is one of the approaches. Also, technologically, our technological team has seen how to code in various procurements, how to code the bid to make sure that it has not been opened when it should not have been opened, so that we can fairly participate in competitions, and at the same time we prevent any doubt. I would like to add that technological development and digitization also allows us to consider that better GPS, the drones, data accuracy, and so on, that allows to solve many questions in comparison to 5 or 10 years ago. So technological side is also great, and it helps us. Ilse, maybe to add to what you just said about gifts, you were speaking about financial thresholds or also context. This is what I wanted to add. So it's not just a matter of a very symbolic financial threshold, so that everyone would understand what we are speaking about. In our company, we also speak what concerns gifts, about the fact that these gifts maybe should be traditional, seasonal, symbolic, related to the activities of us or someone who gives gifts to us, like stationery or caps or something like that. So, but if we speak about financial value, and if we leave aside these corporate gifts, do we also have to consider the context in which the gifts are made practically? Let's say, if someone gives me a gift when we have the agreement negotiations, then even though this gift is not valuable per se, you know that it is not just a gift if it's done during the negotiations. And due to this, during our training, we always tell our employees that we should look at the context. We cannot just say, this is just this amount and that's it. We also have to look at the context. We always have to think about how it looks like from the side.
Kā tas vispār izskatās? Vai tas nerada
There are specific criteria. Does it give the ground to believe that we are engaged in some dubious activity, and then we have to try to explain, and maybe then it's described in some mass media. Do we really need that? Is that gift worth all this risk? I don't know if there is much to add. How do we interpret the gifts? We can express the value financially, or we can express them as a service. But what helps is that we are very clear, very open, also what concerns criteria. When we support specific initiatives or bodies, we have clear criteria that are in line with our values. And this is what we try to look at, what we try to communicate with other companies. And that this value, the core of the values also include zero tolerance and also other ethical aspects. So, if we don't have brief comments on this set of topics, basically when we focus on internal approaches, internal proceedings. In addition, I would like to speak about the following. Is there something that the companies, representatives of companies can do in the society? Of course, it's important to have the right environment in our companies where we have zero tolerance to corruption, but could we do more? How can we motivate those who are skeptic, who believes that corruption is okay? Can we do something? What should we do? Yes, to tell the truth, we are learning, we are improving. Maybe a year or 2 years ago, in our social media, we didn't indicate that tomorrow, for example, is the International Anti-Corruption Day. Yes, it's a small detail, but as a company, we can highlight this day in our social media. And participation in this event is a wonderful opportunity that it is really worth, wonderful opportunity to tell that it is really worth to adopt this zero tolerance and good governance approach. Yes, it's awareness raising or informative approach, good examples. Courage is also something that could help. That could allow to improve the situation. I think we need an open discussion. We need to have a critical mass of non-tolerant people. And the more people, the more companies, the more organizations join this zero tolerance initiative, and also clearly tell that this will be a way to move away from the culture where unethical acts are accepted for someone's benefits. I think the more we speak about that, the quicker we'll get to the result. Yes, you already outlined and you mentioned and it was mentioned during the previous panel about the corruption perception index. We see that these trends are similar. Is it objective? Considering that this is a corruption perception index, and Ilze, you were quite clear about that, what concerns Nordic countries.
Situācija. Kāpēc mums tas uztveres indeks tomēr, mēs neesam spējuši varbūt tādu lūzumu punktu sasniegt?
Man liekas, tas augstie
I
rādītāji.
believe these high indicators or this high value what concerns the corruption perception index.
Tā
I think
nesodāmības.
it is maybe my personal opinion, but this there is a sense of impunity. We see very clear cases that don't result in court proceedings, or we have very long court proceedings. There are results that actually tells the society that the state is not able to deal with this, doesn't persuade the society that no impunity will be allowed. And this makes people believe that corruption is possible, it continues. Yes, maybe we have managed to deal with small-scale corruption, but what concerns larger scale, and for example, these discussions in Rīdzenes hotel, I think this is something that contributes to this high position in what concerns corruption perception index. Also, commercial bribing, this is maybe something that the society believes takes place on the daily basis, and that's why we are where we are. Having heard the introductory speeches and the previous speakers, I also can say, yes, the index is not what we would like to see. We need to introduce changes, and we have to improve our position. So, what would you say the Santa should bring to Latvia next year? What concerns fight against corruption? Someone says that we should be punished. No gifts allowed. So it's not pre-agreed. Recently, we had an internal management conference, and there were various stories, inspirational and practical. And there was one speaker who told about winter swimming and breathing and so on, and personal and work-life balance. And then she just mentioned nothing will work if there is no good sleep. So this is what I would like to wish to all of you. Let us all sleep well during the night. Let us Santa bring this benefit to us. Then we'll have more energy to fight corruption. I believe that we need Santa as such, who is a mythical character, sees everything and at all times. So maybe Santa should bring this conscience to us and this awareness that even if I'm not caught or I'm not noticed in in giving bribes, so that we would have this awareness or this belief that the Santa will notice, there will be someone who notices, and no gifts will be brought to us. And what concerns our society, this could allow to meet social needs, economic needs of the society, and this could be a gift that we could receive if we were ethical and did everything legally in whatever we
Ievadīja mana nākamo pavisam.
Thank you. And this question is a bridge to my very practical next question. Let us return to the reality. Question to both of you. What you and the companies you represent will do more and better to fight corruption? A simple answer. We will persistently continue what we started. This governance culture is being implemented in our company for the last 3 to 4 years. We will continue educating ourselves. We will be competent. And it's quite good that we have somewhere to ask questions. And KPMG has really helped us in management matters and other matters. We will also continue to discuss situations with law enforcement bodies. And we will continue working closer with people, because people conversations really help. Like we can say, just think, do you really need that? Will that help? And so on. And I think if we continue doing that, then the situation will improve even in a year. So we will continue developing ourselves and developing others. Yes, of course, the scope of tools should be quite varied. We need a systematic approach, and we need also some special measures, like a campaign or similar events. But this cannot proceed just on the basis of campaigns. We need to do that on a daily basis. There are no breaks, and this is a continuous process. What concerns KPMG, I can claim that the company will continue working on this. Our procedures become more intensive. We really monitor if we are unbiased, and our internal and external activities will be monitored. But what concerns externally, we are a part of the working groups of the Foreign Investors Council, and we also will support events that contribute to greater openness. We will also continue to be an ally to our customers in their strivings to achieve zero tolerance to corruption. Thank you. And what would you wish to the law enforcement bodies? The society is expecting the result. We see these situations where initially there is this belief that this could be a corruption case, and we would like them to work with all their might for the society to see that the corruption is prevented and actions are taken against corruption for real. I wish persistence, and I appreciate the cooperation that we have had so far, and we are quite positive about that, and we wish that to continue. Thank you. Unless Ilse wants to add something, we could finalize this discussion. Thank you to Ilze, and thank you to Vilnis, and thank you to our wonderful audience. Thank you.
Paldies liels diskusijas dalībniekiem. Aicināsim visus tūliņ
Thank you
doties.
to the panelists. I will invite everyone to go for a coffee break now. But as we just heard, there were wishes to the Santa and what we could wish to each other. When we organized this conference, we realized that this topic is quite difficult. And when I tell to someone that I work with corruption matters, people just say it's so difficult, so difficult. And then I ask myself, should I continue with this load on my shoulders, or maybe I should adopt a more joyful approach? We will return in half an hour with the next speaker, who in preparation for this meeting also used the word joy and happiness. But before we move forward, I want to ask the following question. What happens with UN? Why they chose this particular day to that is devoted to the anti-corruption matters? This is a time before Christmas when we buy gifts and so on. Why this day? Couldn't it be some other day? But maybe this was a considerate choice that maybe allows us to ask something from the Santa. Thank you for being here, and we will resume at 11:45.
kuras nosaukums ir korupcija nacionālās un globālās drošības drauds. Lai šajā otrajā daļā
Let us continue and we will then mark this part 2 with outlook on the global corruption and how we see it outside of the borders of Latvia, but meaning also internationally in such contexts where also Latvia is present. But and let us begin now. Our special guest for today, investigative journalist and author, Oliver Bullough. So after his presentation, there will be Keynes Mageli, who also will join from a very serious organization. He works with the serious these economic crimes. So they will continue with their conversation, with their discussion, and the audience present will be able to ask them questions and also participate in the discussion. So in the next hour, this international experience, Oliver Bullough.
We are happy you are here, and please welcome.
Hello, everyone. It's good to be in Riga. And happy International Anti-Corruption Day. I was walking through the Christmas market yesterday evening looking for some presents for my children, and they were playing Christmas songs loudly from a speaker next to the Christmas tree. And I found myself thinking that we could change the lyrics of I wish it could be Christmas every day to I wish it could be International Anti-Corruption Day every day. I'm a journalist and an author. I moved to Russia 24 years ago, almost exactly, because I had always been interested in Russia. I had no intention of writing about corruption. And in fact, for most of the time I was in Russia, I didn't write about corruption. I wrote about the war in Chechnya. I wrote about human rights abuses. I wrote about the shutting down of independent political parties, all of the usual depressing stories that journalists write about when they're in Russia. But of course, it was impossible to live in Russia and not engage with corruption. If you wanted to go swimming, you had to prove you didn't have congenital diseases, which meant you had to give 500 rubles to a doctor in exchange for a piece of paper saying you didn't have diseases. If you wanted to walk freely down the street, you had to occasionally pay money to police officers so they didn't arrest you on whatever charge they'd originally decided to arrest you on. I once arrived in Sochi on a boat from Turkey and was fined $200 for having a business visa and being in a tourist zone, which I think was the most remarkable example of corruption I ever came across. He'd actually arrested every single man on the ferry. So I can suppose I was just one of many people who paid the same fine. But I became interested in corruption as a system rather than as an individual annoyance after the revolution in Ukraine in 2014. Of course, it was 10 years ago exactly. There were protesters on the Maidan in Kyiv, protesting because of Viktor Yanukovych's decision to turn his back on association with Europe and move towards accepting more money from the Russians. And it was not much more than 10 years ago when he fled in a helicopter with bags of money and various pieces of artwork, kicking off the crisis that continues to this day. And it was an extraordinary time, the months after February 2014, when for a short period of time, there was a unique opportunity for a journalist to see behind the scenes of the corrupt officials, see what they had spent their money on. Obviously, many of you who've been to Kyiv will have visited Mezhihiria, Yanukovych's palace. It is, Ukrainians tell me, and I have no reason to doubt them, the biggest log cabin in the world. It is 5 stories high. Yanukovych fancied himself as a hunter. He had certificates on the wall saying he was Hunter of the Year. Year after year after year, there was like a whole row of them. He obviously genuinely believed this was a worthwhile compliment. And this place is amazing. He also had a smaller log cabin in a forest outside Kiev. He did hunt. He had an enclosure with a fence around it, and they would bring in wild boars in a truck and put them in an enclosure, and then he would shoot them. They didn't have anywhere to go, obviously, so it wasn't very glorious hunting, but hunting it was. And there was this amazing exhibition in the National Museum in Kiev where all the various treasures that Yanukovych had accumulated, they put them on display, like a particularly weird, immersive art exhibition. There were many different portraits of Yanukovych. There were many different presents he'd been given, including a paperweight that had once belonged to Stalin. There was a Picasso ceramic, and also just huge quantities of hunting things that people had given him: axes, knives, guns, and so on. And this was all very funny, and it was very easy to laugh at Yanukovych and his friends because they had such appalling taste in stuff, houses, log cabins. But it rapidly became clear that Ukrainian corruption isn't just a Ukrainian story. Because so often the money that was stolen from Ukraine didn't stay in Ukraine. It ended up moving through other places, moving through Latvia, moving through Cyprus, and it so often came to London, where at the time I was living. So I became, well, very alarmed by this and very determined to alert people in the UK to this thing that was apparently happening without anyone knowing. It didn't occur to me that it could be happening with everyone knowing, because it was so dreadful that money that was being stolen from Ukraine or from Russia or from Azerbaijan or Nigeria or wherever was all coming to the UK and being spent in the UK openly. Surely that wouldn't be happening if we knew about it. So it struck me as my job as a journalist was to write about this, to alert the British establishment to what was happening, and then the British establishment would stop this happening. So I wrote articles, and surprise, the British establishment did not stop this happening. In fact, everyone just more or less ignored what I was doing. So I wrote a book about it called Moneyland. I didn't change anything. So I wrote another book called Butler to the World, and that didn't change anything either. Butler to the World is a description of the role of the British state, in particular in the City of London, in accepting stolen money from around the world, trying to explain why this happens and how this happens. And I suppose I was thinking when I wrote this book and researched this book that it would make some people very angry, that there would be a real, an outcry to become a political book. That's what I was hoping. That didn't happen at all. In fact, weirdly, it was sort of the opposite of that. It was read widely. It was widely reviewed. At the end of the year when it came out, it had Book of the Year in the Daily Mail, which is on the far right, and the Daily Worker, which is on the far left, and multiple points in between, including the FT, which is right bang in the middle. And it felt like everything I was saying had just been accepted as true without anyone actually doing anything about it. So the book I'm working on now is an attempt to understand why it is that financial crime is so serious and so important, and yet so hard to do anything about. Why can't we stop it? And I think this is a valid question, because often when governments decide to stop things, they can stop them. If you look at the number of people that die in road traffic accidents in the UK, the government decided in the 1970s it was a priority to stop people dying in road traffic accidents. And the number of people that die in road traffic accidents has fallen by about 80%. The same is true all across the European Union. Governments brought in seatbelts and airbags and all the other safety stuff. And now there are far fewer people die in road traffic accidents. There are still some, but far, far fewer. And yet, if you look at the first known estimate of the volume of money being laundered around the world, which was made in the late 1990s by the head of the International Monetary Fund, he said that between 2 and 5% of global GDP is laundered every year. It was a guess, and I know one of the people who was with him when they made the guess and they came up with the number in the lift on the way down to the conference. This is not a rigorously researched or supported number, but no one disagrees that it's probably about right. The number that people say now for how much money is laundered all around the world is between 2 and 5% of global GDP. 25 years have passed. The world has passed law after law. There have been multiple rounds of FATF, mutual evaluations. Latvia has been criticized. Latvia has cleaned up, and yet nothing apparently has changed. In fact, not only has nothing changed, but the situation is far, far worse because the world economy is so much bigger than it was in 1998. Helpfully, the size of the global economy is approximately $100 trillion right now. So even I can do the mathematics and tell you that. That means that the amount of money that is being laundered annually is between 2 and 5 trillion US dollars every year. Now, I struggle with numbers, very large numbers, of understanding quite what they mean. $2 trillion, if you had $2 trillion in a pile, $2 trillion bills, and you settle down to count them $1 a second until you were finished, that would take you about 70,000 years. It's a huge amount of money, and that's the lower round of the estimate. $5 trillion would take you a little bit longer even than that. So if so much money is being stolen, and we all know that this money, every single one of those dollars has been taken from someone who needs it and has been taken by someone who doesn't need it, and many of the people who are taking it, who are living not so far away from here, are truly appalling people. And yet we are not able to stop them doing what they're doing. There has to be a pretty good reason for why that is. And so that's what my new book is about. And I mean, I don't need to tell you in Latvia that money laundering is a complicated business. It is hard to uncover what is happening. It is hard often to understand what is happening, how it is being done. So as is the case with my previous books, I found it far easier to go back to the beginning, to look at how things were when the world was less complicated, because you can see the dynamics in place in a far simpler and easier to understand way. And to go back to the beginning in the case of fighting money laundering means to go back to 1980 to Florida, because that is where the world began tackling money laundering. Money laundering has always existed, of course, but the first law against it was passed in 1970, the Bank Secrecy Act in the United States, and the first concerted American law enforcement effort was 1980. They called it Operation Greenback, because Americans always have absolutely fantastic names for their operations. Why Florida? Well, Florida was not exactly being subtle about the fact that it was a center of the criminal economy. As you may know, the Federal Reserve, the American central bank, has multiple branches in different American cities. There is a San Francisco Fed, a New York Fed. There is also a Miami Fed. Every year, the Central Federal Reserve in Washington sends out banknotes to all the other branches because, you know, there are always banknotes get used, they get lost, they get damaged, they need to be replaced. So there is always a flow of money out of Washington, which gets printed to other branches of the Federal Reserve so it can go out from banks and be used by ordinary people. That was the case in 1979 everywhere except Miami. Miami did not require banknotes. Instead, it returned $5 billion worth of banknotes every year to the center because so much cash was being paid into banks in Miami, which was the fruits of organized crime, primarily at the time, the drugs trade. So money laundering in Miami in 1980 was not subtle. I've been speaking to detectives who were involved at the time, and the stories they tell are hilarious in terms of the sheer obviousness of what was happening. In order to launder money in Miami in 1980, you took a box of banknotes into a bank, you handed it to the bank, and you were done. I had one particularly entertaining story that I heard of. They were observing a bank that they suspected was involved in money laundering. And every day a car would arrive and with a courier in it who would go into the bank because he had so many boxes of banknotes, he couldn't carry them on his own. And he would ask the bank security guard to come out and help him. And security guard would come out with a trolley and they would load it up with boxes and take them into the bank. Except on this one day, the car was stolen while the courier was in the bank. And he came out and said, "Oh, I've stolen my car." And the security guard said, "Oh, shall I call the police?" He goes, "No, don't worry. Just call me a taxi. I'll be back tomorrow." Losing an occasional car was just the cost of doing business in Miami, even if it was full of banknotes. So what did the federal government do about this? Well, what the money launderers were doing was illegal, because if you had a transaction of more than $10,000, you had to report it to the authorities. And they were not reporting all of these transactions as considerably more than $10,000. So, but because of the intervention launched by the IRS and the FBI and the Miami Police Department, the banks started reporting all of these transactions in huge numbers, which meant the money launderers didn't want to pay their money into the banks anymore in the way they'd been doing it before. So did that solve money laundering? No. Spoiler, it did not. So what did the money launderers do? Well, they split up this huge amounts of money into packets of slightly less than $10,000, and they paid them into the banks, multiple different banks, in order to evade this particular restriction. Now, many of you may have heard the term in money laundering, smurfing. Smurfing is what you call it when you break up a transaction into smaller amounts in order to evade restrictions. This is when the term smurfing was created, because the two of the detectives had children who were big fans of the television program, the cartoon Smurfs, which you may know as these little blue guys with white hats who spend their days running around not doing anything. And so the detectives just saw all of these money couriers running around all day, not doing anything, going in and out of banks. And they thought they looked like the Smurfs, not because they were blue, but because they weren't doing anything. So they became known as Smurfs, which they are known as to this day. Weirdly, the Smurfs actually originate in French. It's French, they're called Schtroumpfs in French. But French people call money laundering couriers Smurfs rather than Schtroumpfs, because they say calling them Schtroumpfs sounds stupid, which means that they haven't really noticed that calling them Smurfs also sounds pretty stupid. So anyway, the regulations changed, smurfing became also illegal, and that became cracked down on. Did that solve money laundering? Spoiler, no, it didn't. The money launderers realized that the solution was to put their money in jets, fly out of Miami, the very short journey over the water to the Bahamas or the Cayman Islands or Anguilla or the British Virgin Islands or Panama or any of the other jurisdictions, which were very, very close to the United States that did not have the same legal system as the United States. This was a bit more of a problem, but there was also a solution to this, and this is why we gained in the 1980s United Nations Treaty Against Money Laundering, and then in 1989 at the G7 meeting in Paris, we gained the Financial Action Task Force, the global task force to end financial crime. And that has had an amazing impact. Globally, all the countries go around assessing each other, checking how well they're doing on tackling money laundering. All of the financial institutions now have compliance departments who check how well they're doing tackling money laundering. Compliance is a $274 billion a year industry, according to the latest estimates. This is an amazing effort being put in to stop money laundering. Is it stopping money laundering? No, it isn't. There is still 2 to 5% of global GDP being laundered, despite the efforts in 1980 in Florida and despite the efforts everywhere else that are happening now. So that's what interests me. Why, if all this effort is being done, if all the governments in the world are determined to stop this problem, is the problem not being stopped? Now, one of the things that my friends and I like to do when we have spare time and a desire to do it is organize what we call the London Kleptocracy Tours. London Kleptocracy Tours are very loosely modeled on Hollywood bus tours. In Hollywood, you can get a bus tour and people will point out houses that belong to film stars or that used to belong to film stars as a recognition of the glamour and wonder of Tinseltown. In London, we have a similar situation, just we don't have film stars living in London, we have kleptocrats. So we put people in a bus and we drive them around West London. We point out houses that belong to Russian oligarchs and Nigerian regional governors and Angolan politicians' daughters and all the other guests of our fair city. Now, it has been interesting watching as attention has come on London and its role as a center of kleptocracy. It has been interesting watching how the kleptocrats have responded to this. Now, I'm not going to claim it is our London Kleptocracy Tours that have been the main driver of this dynamic. I think we are the funniest response to the London kleptocracy problem, but we're also probably the least relevant. But there has been, despite the British establishments desire to welcome as much money into our country as possible, there have been sporadic efforts to stop money being laundered too obviously in London. And the kleptocrats have responded to that in exactly the same way as the money launderers responded to the efforts of the FBI and the IRS in Florida in the early 1980s. So initially, the first Russian kleptocrats who came and bought property in London after 1991 just bought it directly and openly in the sort of property equivalent of turning up at a bank with a box full of banknotes. I've spoken to an estate agent who actually ran the first trade. It was literally some money was transferred to London, house was bought in the guy's own name, and everyone was happy. But gradually, it became increasingly clear that not all of the money coming out of London, coming out of Russia, was honestly obtained. There were scandals like the Bank of New York scandal, Mabitech scandal, and so on in the 1990s. And it started to look like the Russians needed to perhaps obscure what they were doing. So they started hiding their ownership of property via shell companies registered in offshore jurisdictions. And that was a very successful way of hiding what they were doing for a while. But gradually, the authorities started to notice this was happening and started to try and stop it, not so much because they were worried about kleptocratic cash, but more because they were worried about tax avoidance and tax evasion. So about a decade ago, the British government made it much less attractive to use shell companies to own property in London. Did that stop Russian kleptocrats buying property in London? No, it did not. Instead, they changed from using shell companies to using trusts, which are a far more opaque instrument where they just have a relationship with a lawyer in a tax haven rather than having a company in a tax haven. And now it is impossible to see who owns the property. We are in England and Wales. In fact, the number of shell companies owning property has gone down in the last 10 years from about 100,000 to about 90,000. The number of trusts owning property have, however, gone up to about 250,000. So the problem is very much not solved. Once again, the money launderers have responded to the efforts we've taken to try to stop money laundering and have just carried on regardless. Now, this is a fairly depressing message to bring to a country like Latvia. Latvia has, I don't think I'm breaking any news here to say that Latvia used to be a significant part of the problem. And it is really good to see the efforts that Latvia has made to drive dirty money out of the country, to stop being part of the problem and instead become part of the solution. But there is a real problem here, which is, of course, Latvia is significantly big enough to be part of the problem, but is not big enough to be the solution, right? So what is the challenge? Because if Latvia stops moving money, then perhaps it can go via payment service providers in a country quite nearby, or it perhaps can go via banks in Dubai or banks in Singapore or wherever. And if money is being laundered anyway, why bother trying to stop it? That's the question that underlies everything. If it's very difficult to do anything about, if the criminals always adjust, you may as well not bother. I have a friend called Jason Sharman, who is a professor at Cambridge University, who thinks this about the global compliance industry. He says, if we're spending $274 billion on compliance and achieving absolutely nothing, we may as well just not bother spending the $274 billion and just give up altogether. He's joking, but only joking a little. So I think the problem here is that we tend to think about money laundering in completely the wrong way. I said at the beginning, when governments seek to solve a problem like road traffic accidents, they tend to be able to solve it. But road traffic accidents and money laundering are fundamentally different problems. Road traffic accidents is an engineering problem. If you can make cars better, cars safer, then you can reduce road traffic accidents. That isn't what's happening with money laundering. Money laundering is not an engineering problem. You can't just change the pipes that the money flows through and solve the problem. It is a human nature problem, which is that humans are greedy. We like stealing money, and if we steal it, we like to keep it. And if you want to keep it, you have to launder it. And so there will always be demand for money laundering. So why do we bother trying to fight it? Well, that's a really interesting question, actually. I did a talk in a school about 5 years ago about money laundering, and talking to schools is far more scary than talking in a group like this, because you never quite know what children are going to come out with. And at the end of it, one of the kids put his hand up and said, yeah, if you know all this about money laundering, why don't you just go and do it? which was slightly insulting and suggested that perhaps he hadn't very much enjoyed my talk. But it was a really good question. And I think about it like every day. What is the answer to that question? Because it's the question that confronts all of us, right? What's the point of trying to stop money laundering if it's going to happen anyway? Why don't we just go and do it? And there was in Florida, inevitably, because it's always Florida, there was a professor who was an expert in money laundering who got arrested for money laundering. And, you know, I think many of us have studied money laundering. We can sympathize with that because like, you may as well, right? No one else apparently cares. So why not just cash in? But the reason is that the world would be much better if there wasn't money laundering. That's just a fact. The world would be much better if Putin and his friends did not get to steal all the money they want, launder it into the West, buy property and use it to bribe and undermine Western political processes and democracy. The world would be better without that. The world would be better without human trafficking, and it would be better without fentanyl. It would be better without all of these problems. Now, there will always be criminals who want to do these things, but we don't need to make life easy for them. And so I think the way to understand money laundering is that crime can be profitable, right? And the way to stop it is to take the profit out of crime. And the more expensive we make it to launder money, the less profitable crime will become. So therefore, you can never erase crime altogether, but you can reduce it by making it less profitable. And that, I think, is what Latvia has done. You have managed to introduce an impediment to the flow of money. And that's a really important thing to do. Because back in Florida in 1980, it's possible to laugh at the extreme obviousness of money laundering back then. But it is more expensive to have to break huge packages of money up into little bags of $9,900 and launder them all individually. That is more expensive. It requires more people. And it did take the profit out of the more egregious forms of crime. It costs more money to put your cash in a jet and fly it to the Bahamas than it does just to take it to the First National Bank of Miami and pay it straight in across the counter. So by tackling money laundering that way, they were succeeding. It's possible to look at it and say, well, the money got laundered anyway, so it was a pointless activity. But that's to ask the question in the wrong way, because the only way that you can tackle money laundering is by making it more annoying for people to launder money. And that is the ambition that we all have. So the message for this is that tomorrow, International Anti-Corruption Day, is that having succeeded in Latvia, or having progressed in Latvia, so you no longer move all of the money for the Russians, don't just look around the world and think, well, that was stupid because now Dubai is doing it. Please go to Dubai and tell them how you did it and tell them to stop as well. Because if they stop, then eventually it will be even harder for the Russians to move money. And then maybe Turkey will stop as well. And then eventually, who knows, maybe even London will stop. I mean, you know, let's not get too far ahead of ourselves, but maybe one day. You know, all I can say is thank you for listening. Thank you for doing what you've done. Thank you for not giving up because it's pointless, because it isn't pointless. It's really important. Thanks very much.
Good afternoon. I'm going to say a few words after Oliver, which is always difficult, especially because I'm going to try and say something positive about the UK. And then we'll have time for questions. If we could put the slide with the Slido code on the screen, and then questions can start coming in, and then in about 10 minutes, we can start going through them. So first of all, I just want to say it's been great to see the variety of people at this event. So we've had people speaking from government, from business, from the media, and also from civil society. And I think that really shows the importance of working together to tackle money laundering, to tackle corruption. All of those organizations are part of the fight. And similarly, it's something we need to work internationally on. It's not something that the UK can solve. It's not something that the US can solve. It's not something that Latvia can solve. But hopefully, together, we can have an effect or make an impediment, as Oliver says. So for that, I just want to thank lots of people in the room who have worked with the UK government. We're doing lots of work across the Latvian system at the moment, including with CANAB and others on corruption and illicit finance issues. And now I want to mention about 5 weeks ago, some of you may have seen the UK pass some new legislation in trying to tackle some of these issues. So the Economic Crime and Corporate Transparency Act, one of the biggest reforms is to our company register. Many of you will be familiar with the UK's company register. It's very easy to use. It's got lots of companies in it. But the problem has always been the data has never been verified. So this has been exemplified in many ways across cases, across kind of international requests, and also even people setting up companies in government ministers' names to apply pressure. Well, luckily, changes are coming. So from now on, all existing and all future companies will need to provide identification and will need to provide details. And also there'll be more power to strike companies off and remove them from a register or force them to correct information. Similarly, company structures in the UK have been abused previously. Oliver's written about this extensively. And there are now some reforms to limited partnerships and Scottish limited partnerships coming, which will hopefully reduce that. There are many company types across the UK. So we're looking to kind of tackle where we can. Similarly, crypto assets. We're bringing in new legislation to enable more criminal seizure and also more civil recovery linked to crypto assets. And similarly, one of the big problems, we talk about compliance departments. If a bank believes a person is involved in money laundering, they'll fill out a suspicious activity report to the UK government. They'll get rid of that customer. But in the UK, there's lots of banks. They'll go to another bank. And currently, banks aren't able to share that information freely to say, this person's had an issue at our bank with money laundering. Now we are bringing in a mechanism where banks will be able to share data in that matter. So if one bank suspects a person of money laundering, they will be able to alert others to hopefully stop people just moving from one bank to the next. And similarly as well, bringing in effectively overuse of business. So making it a failure to prevent crimes like fraud, similar to what we did with the Bribery Act a long time ago. So hopefully all those are coming into force in the near future and will hopefully have an impact on some of these items we've discussed. But I think two things, the biggest powers the UK has in this area is the Bribery Act, which makes it an offence for anyone in the UK or UK citizen abroad to receive or to give a bribe. Many people have been prosecuted for this. We've had a couple this year, a former oil minister from Nigeria and a Madagascan a case involved in Gemfield's aid to the president, Madagascan president. So I think this is a really powerful tool. And similarly, unexplained wealth orders, a piece of legislation the UK's had for a while. There have been issues with those. Unfortunately, they haven't been used a great deal, but we have had some successes with those, but as well, unfortunately, some failures. I think one of the problems is when you're trying to go after some of the biggest players in this game, they also are very powerful and have lots and lots of money. You know, Oliver talked about huge amounts of money that are being laundered to pay for lawyers and legal defense, which is, of course, part of the problem. So we're looking at also effectively limiting the UK government's liability going after some of those people. So I just wanted to raise a few hopeful positive points in this fight. And then what we'll do now is go to the Slido and kind of have a wider conversation. So please do put your questions in there or feel free to, of course, just ask them directly. And I'll just get that loaded up now. So I think one of the things we'll start with, why I just found some good questions, is effectively one of the things we've not spoken about yet today are what we call in the UK strategic lawsuits against public participation. This is effectively where persons try to stop the public conversation on some of these matters. And I know it's something that Oliver's quite passionate about and has been involved in. So it'd be interesting to get your reflections on kind of the issues we have in the UK and elsewhere on SLAPs and the effect that's had in your career.
Yeah, thank you. Strategic lawsuits against public participation are one of the many pressing issues that prevent corruption being exposed, because it has become very easy for wealthy individuals to use their wealth to retain lawyers who can then threaten mainly but not only journalists who look like they might expose their wrongdoing. Lawsuits in the UK are extremely expensive. Now, I am currently being sued in Portugal by a wealthy Angolan, which is annoying and time-consuming, but not very expensive. So far, my costs have been approximately 5,000 euros altogether. It's not nice, but you know, that's a manageable sum. In Britain, an equivalent case would probably have cost me £300,000 just to get to the beginning of the court case. Now, obviously, I'm confident that I'm going to win. I'm confident in the quality of my reporting. But if you just have to pay that much money just to get to the start line, there's a huge number of people who don't want to get to the start line. So part of the issue is that because it's so expensive to bring these cases in the UK, that foreign billionaires like to sue other journalists or other investigators in the UK rather than their own countries. There's a particularly egregious example at the moment with an American journalist who is being sued under data protection law in the UK, despite the fact that he's never been to the UK, and all written for a British publication, simply because lawyers are seeking to exploit British law to make money, to bring their influence to bear on other jurisdictions. And this has been going on for ages, despite efforts to solve it. It is pleasing that there are now government efforts to try and solve this problem, to try and prevent lawyers from doing this. But just an example of how urgent this is. Yevgeny Prigozhin, may he rest in peace, sadly departed, head of Wagner Group, possibly the worst person in the world until his death, leaving that position open. He sued Elliot Higgins, British investigator, for saying he was head of the Wagner Group, not a secret, but sued him for essentially saying the truth. And although the case eventually fell apart after the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, he still managed to find a British journalist to represent him to do this. So, you know, it is an ongoing and really serious part of the battle against corruption, simply that it's very hard to talk about corruption because it can be so expensive if corrupt individuals don't want you to do so.
Thank you. And the first question, we've actually got two questions on this topic, which is around AMLA. So should Europe have an AMLA to be able to effectively defend Europe as a whole for laundering? And do you think it will have a significant impact on the fight against money laundering?
I mean, I do think it is a flaw in the architecture of the European Union, and I speak carefully because I'm British, and obviously, you know, we have our own problems. So I'm very happy to criticize Britain in other ways. But while we're talking about the European Union, it is a flaw in the architecture of the European Union that the money can move freely. In fact, it's a single currency across much of the European Union, but there isn't a single law enforcement agency tasked with following that money, which does mean that people moving the money have advantages that the people who are investigating the money don't have. And it does make it difficult. It makes life easier for the criminals and harder for the people trying to stop the criminals. So having an EU-wide agency seems like an excellent idea to me. I would like it to have a far broader mandate than it has. I would like there to be a European form of the FBI tasked with investigating cross-border crime, financial crime, all the way through the European Union, because it is, you know, remarkably easy to hide your money just by moving it between banking systems. So, you know, it's a good start. Yeah, definitely a good start. And I've been following the debate about where it's going to be based. Apparently, everywhere is best suited to have it. But you know, who knows? I mean, people in Dublin tell me it should be in Dublin. People here say it should be here. People in Vilnius say it should be there. You know, who knows? I expect people in Cyprus say the same thing. So yeah, I'll follow that with interest.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a really interesting development. And I think, yeah, as I say, 10 countries bidding, I think, at the moment to host it. But I think hopefully it'll be a really effective tool going forwards. The second question is on a fairly recent UK law around disclosing beneficial owners of real estate. So this came in, I think, about a year ago. And effectively, the question is it effective to fight AML in tax issues? I'll give an answer and then I'll let Oliver answer. So yeah, I think it's a really interesting piece of legislation. Lots of property, and particularly valuable property often, is owned overseas. So the legislation has come out and the vast majority of people now have completed their aspect. There was a slightly confused piece, I think, in the media where there was a number of companies that weren't on the public register. And that's because as a trust, that information was held by the government, but wasn't held in the public domain, which I think made some news reports around it actually being fairly ineffective. But Oliver may have a different opinion.
There's been a number of changes in the UK recently about beneficial ownership transparency. You know, Britain has had a very transparent register for a long time, but the problem has been that none of the information has been verified. You could say whatever you liked. You know, I had my own shell company that I just created to see how easy it was. It was very easy. Other people have done the same. If you look up on Companies House, you'll find a person whose name is Stalin. There's an Osama bin Laden on there, Saddam Hussein. I don't think those people actually have companies in the UK. Certainly not Stalin anyway. Well, I assume. But I think that's just people with a funny sense of humor, because no one was checking, so you could just say what you liked. That has now changed. The legislation means that hopefully that will change. People won't be able to do that anymore. But the beneficial ownership registry that you refer to has the same flaws, which is that the information wasn't being verified. So it was very difficult to know if what was being provided was accurate. And it's very difficult to know now if Companies House, which is tasked with checking the information, will have enough money to do the work that it needs. I mean, so often the problem that we have in the UK is we have excellent laws. You referred to unexplained wealth orders earlier, but we just don't have enough money for the police agencies tasked with enforcing those laws. So the laws don't really amount to anything. Is beneficial ownership transparency good? Yes, obviously. But at the moment, it's very easy now to just use a trust to hide your ownership instead of a company. So it doesn't really achieve anything unless you can close all of the loopholes. But yeah, it's a step in the right direction. And as I say, just making things difficult for the bad guys, making things annoying for the bad guys is worth doing, and just for its own sake.
Absolutely, and I think that's it. This is all effectively, taking steps further down the line. There's no, unfortunately, perfect law to solve these issues. So I think getting closer down that line is an important thing. We've got a question about: would you say that the current sanctions against Russia work? So again, I'll give a brief answer and hand over to Oliver. I think the purpose of sanctions is behavioural change. So obviously what the hope of the sanctions were that it would change Russia's behaviour in terms of their illegal invasion of Ukraine. Obviously that is still ongoing. But I think the huge amount of money, assets, property that have been frozen in the EU, the UK, US and elsewhere is starting to have an effect. There's lots of interesting analysis work on effectively what that's looking like in Russia, what that's going to look like in the future, looking at kind of the economic sector. But there is obviously other things going on that affect that as well, including obviously lots of young men who are no longer working in Russia and have left either voluntarily or obviously as part of the invasion force. So it'll be interesting to see how that progresses. I think sanctions are of course a political tool rather than a law enforcement tool, which brings its own benefits, but also brings its own challenges as well. Oliver.
Yeah, I tend to think sanctions are an admission of failure. If you're relying too much on sanctions, then you are admitting that your law enforcement capabilities are not sufficient and not what they should be. Obviously, it's good that Russian companies and individuals were sanctioned after February 2022. It's important. You couldn't just leave it as nothing. I suppose my concern is what happens now. It's been almost 2 years, and very little of that money is really being investigated. There is no progress forward or back. It's like there's a huge quantity of assets which are sort of stuck in limbo, and there isn't really any decision about what's going to happen to them, because sooner or later you have to make a decision. So I would like there to be a far larger investment in law enforcement to investigate that money. And I'd also like, and this is not, I know this isn't a popular viewpoint, but if you are aiming to change behavior, you need to give the possibility of money being unsanctioned. You need to say, if you do the right thing, and here are the right things you can do, then we will give you your money back, or give you some of your money back. Because what we want is to split the Russian elite. We don't want to, in a way, by sanctioning everyone, we sort of almost united them around Putin. It's like, well, look, we hate all of you. So I would like to see suggestions made to, and I appreciate this isn't going to make popular everywhere, but I would like to see suggestions being made to Russian oligarchs as if you give half your money to Ukraine, you can have the rest, for example. I'd like to see that. But it's very difficult politically to make that case, and I can understand why they're not doing it, which is why I'm not a politician.
Fair enough.
Also, I'm rude.
So this next question I have Google translated, so hopefully we've got the gist. But effectively the question is, what is the strategic plan for 2024 to reduce corruption, and how many percentage points do you intend to reduce corruption by in 2024? So I think for the UK, there's a new anti-corruption strategy being launched in early 2024, which outlines our kind of plan over the next, I think it's going to cover 3 or 4 years, which you'll be able to, that'll be a public document, so you'll be able to view that shortly. when we talk about reducing corruption by percentage points, I feel it's very, very hard to measure these things. I'd say it's very hard to measure money laundering. There's this 2 to 5% figure thrown around, which is trillions in difference. And similarly for corruption, there's a few different groups trying to measure it, including, of course, TI. But how you really measure this is very, very difficult. Measuring any kind of illegal crime in general is difficult. You know, how many illegal drugs are there? How can we tell that? We can confiscate some, but we don't obviously know what we don't confiscate. And similarly, when we obviously prosecute people for money laundering, again, we know how much we've got from that case, but we don't really know what the scale is. So I think, how many do you intend to reduce it by? As many as possible. But I think it's very hard to talk in those figures. Any comments on that, Oliver?
Yeah, I mean, I often when I talk about percentages, I remember something that was once said by my friend Daria Kaleniuk, who is an anti-corruption activist in Ukraine, who many of you will know. And I once asked her how she managed to keep fighting corruption in Ukraine and not get disheartened, considering how very difficult it was and how few people there were fighting it and how many corrupt officials there were. And she said that she doesn't think about defeating it. She says that, you know, this is what she was saying at the time, we're at 4% and her ambition is to get to 5%. So I tend to think about it like that. You know, any change is good. Any improvement is good. Even, I mean, we're not going to defeat corruption, right? It's we're not going to defeat money laundering, but just by, you know, making life annoying for officials, that's good. You know, I can remember Daria works for an organization called the Anti-Corruption Action Center, in which she runs it in Kiev. They once produced a report on corruption in Ukrainian pharmaceuticals, which was a very egregious problem. And I said, well, you know, did you solve the problem? And they said, no, not at all. But we did make the corrupt officials register a whole new load of shell companies, you know, which is annoying for them. And that's sufficient. So that's what I think is our ambition, really, is to try and annoy rich and powerful people.
Okay, and perhaps a slightly controversial question. We've got, has Brexit had a significant consequence on the AML system in the UK? So I think from my point of view, the UK has lots of law enforcement officers overseas and lots in Europe as well. And there was concerns about information sharing on criminal cases between UK and European jurisdictions, and similarly on Europol. All that did get worked out ahead of the UK leaving the EU, so that hasn't had an effect going forwards. And in terms of the AML system, again, we're still working, you know, constantly in terms of compliance and kind of align things like sanctions with the EU. So I think there's still lots and lots of kind of co-working going on in that space. But Oliver, have you seen anything any different?
No, I mean, I think there have been effects on the margins with regard to things like human trafficking because of the departure from the Dublin Agreement. But in general, no, I'm pretty heartened by how possibly because of a change of prime minister, relations seem to have improved with our neighbours, and hopefully that will continue. It's far too important an issue to argue about just because we don't currently get along. You know, I think we have in Britain very good relations with lots of European countries which are which are bilateral rather than multilateral. So obviously with Latvia, with the Netherlands and lots of other places. So no, I think it's going pretty well actually in that regard. But so much of that is because of what is happening in Ukraine. I think there's been a sudden realization of how important this issue is that perhaps wasn't present in the past.
Thank you. Okay, and then we've got a question around various Scandinavian banking scandals in the Baltics. And do you think that there's sufficient oversight from their home countries, said about Swedish oversight here, and their subsidiaries abroad is sufficient? And this is a really difficult part because if you're, you know, there's many banks, not just in the Baltics and not just from Sweden, that have, you know, multiple countries that they operate in, you know, huge banks, and they have different rules in different jurisdictions, and they can vary a little bit. And I imagine the rules in Sweden and Latvia aren't particularly different, but obviously some countries, they do vary hugely. So I think it's very difficult to kind of give a good answer to that one, I'm afraid. I think sometimes, obviously, it can then become a little bit of a blame game between jurisdictions, which obviously isn't useful to solve these problems. But yeah, I haven't got any other experience on that one. Oliver, anything you'd add?
I mean, it's not only a problem here, right? I mean, if you look at which which branches of, say, big French banks or big American banks have got in trouble. They're often the branches in London because they're the branches which are far away from their domestic oversight. We obviously the same here with Swedish banks, the same in Estonia with Danske Bank. It's sort of natural that, when you're a little bit further away, you're a bit further away from being overseen. I mean, it is, I think, to go back to the question about AMLA, it's a good argument for a beefed up European Union wide anti-money laundering system, and I would say a European wide law enforcement system, because it means that you don't have these kind of nooks and crannies for dirty money to hide in.
Okay, and then we've got a question around, do you have any plans to educate society and make it more aware of corruption? So I think from my point of view, this is a really interesting topic that we're looking at. There's been some interesting academic research recently that effectively says the more you talk about corruption in a country, often actually the worse it can get, because people then begin to think it's endemic, people begin to think everyone is involved in that corruption, and people begin to think there's nothing that they can do about that corruption. So I think you've got to think very carefully about how you do this and how you message this. But I do think it's something that in general is becoming more of an awareness. Obviously, lots of books about it, lots of articles about it, films and such as well. But I think, how do you educate those people, like you say, in the schools or the youth? We've done talks at various universities in Latvia on kind of money laundering and corruption as well. And some aspects youths are targeted. So money mules, people who take amounts of money and put them into their banks, often students are targeted who may or may not be aware of kind of these issues. So I think society does need to be aware of corruption, but we need to do it in a way where it doesn't seem like corruption is such a kind of endemic problem in that society that they almost begin to give up. Oliver.
Yeah, I agree. There's this. I mean, I think that the recognition, again, perhaps because of what's happening in Ukraine, about the fact that corruption and democracy can't cohabit. That if we're fighting for democracy, we need to be fighting against corruption. This is something that Ukrainians have known for a long time. They've talked for years about how they're fighting on two fronts. They're fighting against Putin abroad and against corruption at home. And it seems that to me that's obvious, and that's true everywhere. If we wish to resist Russian interference or non-anti-democratic interference in our societies, then we need to reduce corruption, because it will be via corruption that interference happens.
Thank you. And then it's got a question saying, effectively, what can be a solution for Russian money laundering in Latvia, given it is on the doorstep of Russia? And I think, as Oliver said in his speech, Latvia's changed a lot. I remember I came out here 2 years ago, and before coming out here, I Googled money laundering in Latvia, and was reading various articles and was reading things like the FATF report from 2018. And that made me think, oh, okay, there's going to be some really interesting things to do here. There's going to be a lot of work that needs doing, a lot of things for the UK to do. And then I arrived, and my first few weeks went around and spoke to many government departments. And so much had changed from kind of 2018-ish to kind of when I arrived in 2021, that by then there were some really strong institutions, there were some really strong laws, and there were some cases beginning to go through the courts. So I think Latvia is in a very good place now for targeted, for not for Russian money. There's other jurisdictions that they may be looking at now instead of Latvia. I think the other problem Latvia's got is, of course, on trade sanctions. You share a border with Russia, and unfortunately, that puts you on the forefront of kind of the European fight against sanctions evasion, which is a very difficult place to be. And obviously, different people, different parts of Europe have kind of different response to sanctions and different interpretations of sanctions legislation, which makes them very difficult for Latvia as a whole. But generally, I think you guys have been going the right way since kind of 2018 onwards. So I think, as Oliver says, just kind of keep that fight going forwards. Anything you'd add?
Yeah, I just thought it was really interesting what the American ambassador said earlier about the need for quicker legal processes. I think this isn't a uniquely Latvian problem. We see this, widely, that these cases can take a very, very long time to prosecute. And it's difficult to maintain interest in society if it looks like people accused of corruption can manage to prolong the cases for so long. So I think that's an issue in the UK as well. These cases drag on and on and on. And so, but no, I mean, this widely quoted statistic that's a little bit hard to source, that the 1% of all dollar transactions went through Riga in 2015. That's not happening anymore. Yeah, but so there has been action taken, but there's always more to do.
And then what will be the last question? So since the invasion of Ukraine, the fight has grown, particularly against Russian oligarchs, but has the success against illicit funds outside of that also improved? I think yes. So lots of legislation that's changed in the UK has been post the invasion of Ukraine, the piece I've talked about today, but others as well. And although that will obviously make money laundering harder for Russian oligarchs, it will make it harder for all kind of criminals and oligarchs from elsewhere as well. So I think in the UK and elsewhere, the fight against money laundering and corruption is obviously targeting to some extent Russian oligarchs, but is also going much wider and bringing in kind of systematic change, which will hopefully capture or begin to capture everyone. Anything you'd add, Oliver?
Yeah, I mean, it's been really heartening to see the White House declare the fight against corruption as a national security priority, which is brilliant, and so it should be. You know, I think we need to be on our guard against political changes in all countries of people who argue back against that, say, well, you know, business should be allowed to run. You know, you know, putting national security first is a good thing. And I don't think anyone in Latvia needs to be told that, but perhaps in Western Europe, that's something that we need to be reminded of.
And then, of course, there are lots of people as well, Oliver, thanking you for your work and for your coming here today, and of course for your books and journal publications as well. So thank you very much for coming to Latvia this week and for speaking at this event.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me, and thanks for listening.
Paldies iepriekšējiem runātājiem. Kā es pirms šīs dienas pasākuma. Thank you, Oliver.
Thank you to the previous speakers. We are going to continue now with the discussion.
Please feel free to join us and listen. And turpinot, kā mēs kādu
So, to continue, we talked with the attendees of this seminar, this conference. We had another researcher and author last year participating, and now lately those experts reading Sarah's book actually said that now they are also reading Oliver's books that are now on the agenda to read. But my encouragement would be, most probably we will have to be meeting at the same kind of event or very similar one also next year, because all the topics of corruption will not be covered that quickly. So in Slido, please then continue recommending, maybe recommend us with an author we would have to, or you would like us to invite to discuss next year. But now this is going to be the final discussion, and continuing the topics that are so often mentioned here today. So how Western democracies can fight corruption. And we are, of course, going to be sharing Latvian examples now, these lessons Oliver and Kane also mentioning. Now, I invite on stage, or to take the best seats, Matis Kļamiņš, Financial Intelligence Unit, FIU. Matis, could you take a microphone? Laima Letiņa is from the board, and Inese, Delna, Transparency International first head and expert in good management practice, and we are going to share our organizational experience and also experience of international organizations. Well, this is how we agreed. Actually, we are going to ask questions to one another. I'm not going to only moderate and be asking questions I am curious about. We are going to be discussing what to do to reduce corruption in the world so that it does not become, or so that it's not a threat to our national security and also global security. So since Russia's invasion in Ukraine, there are numerous discussions in Latvia about Latvia's system, about the Western system combating corruption, and how to limit all these people who are, well, offending, violating, and also are posing the threat to national security, to global security. So the initial question from my part to all of you is, really, 652 days since the beginning of war in Ukraine, and this is all we talk about, and we have spoken about? What are the new challenges? And honestly, 24th of February, 1.5 years ago, Delna and Transparency International first question to various organizations, not only in Latvia, but elsewhere in Europe too, is how governments of states can rapidly actually counter the activities of oligarchs, observe, meaning comply with sanctions, and thus reduce access to illicit funds or to funds in general, to funds that fund war in Ukraine. So what has changed in your view during these 652 days? I really hope it's not going to be years ahead. So what can you say? What have we done to, on one hand, to comfort, but at the same time, what can we take pride in? I think 1.5 years ago, one of the first institutions we called and asked what is the plan of Latvia is FIU. Matis Ļaviņš, maybe you can say, then respond to this answer first. It has been time when we had a lot of work, and I think that everyone, starting from the private sector and then down the chain and other various institutions and law enforcement, and its fight against sanction evasions and violations, we have seen a huge increase in the amount of work and information received from the private sector, where really very diligently they view these issues, and especially the finance sector that reports. And so the increase of the workload, it's not only in FIU, but also in law enforcement institutions, and especially there where the situation geographical is such that we are very close to the respective events. I mean, like Arab Spring, for example, and refugee crisis, which again in Europe, there were countries at the forefront of this wave to be hit by that, Italy, southern countries. So now Latvia, sectoral sanctions and the flow of goods then is the one that is on the front and is also responsible for a lot of work and supervision. But so the good news is that we have developed a lot, we have grown a lot, and there is so with such devotion, with such we have participated in so many seminars, in so many think tanks, developed the guidelines and good practice examples, and we have shared information, exchanged, and we have worked so much with these specific issues which had made us more aware, more ready. And so this 1.5 years, it's been challenging indeed. And so you say, for example, that the institutions have learned a lot and have done a lot, but are there results? Can we see them? So these are these lessons learned. We have introduced them in practice and we are doing it. But, you know, as it's in school also, well, what would you say? What is the mark? I mean, from 0 to 10, probably, meaning all these 1.5 years. I mean, the lessons we had to learn that all began in 2018. Now we are putting in practice. This is like a next level already. And this is now the big test, if I can say so. And so what are the results of the big test, quote unquote? Maybe you believe you actually had to learn more, maybe study more, go to school back a little bit, and maybe achieve better results, or we have done very well, very good homeworks, and we have done everything possible. I don't think we could have been ready for all of this. No, that's clear, but I think that if anyone asks me now, then I definitely believe that we can be proud of our performance and of our efforts, what we have done. I don't know, what is this? 652 days have passed. What happened in your field? Thank you. Hello, everyone. And I would actually want to go further, even farther than 2018. I would even go back to 2014, because if we look at Russia's aggression and events in Crimea, this is actually the reference point, the first one where we can speak about large sanctions in financial sector in relation to limiting the cash flow. Now, the amount which we can observe is, well, it's also very broad and it's grown, but I mean, obviously, the activity back then was insufficient and allowing to happen what is going on right now. So, and I'm not criticizing specifically Latvia, maybe, but I'm just saying that what also the foreign expert said is that the moment when you receive a bad mark, you do start changing. You want to become part of a prestigious sector, lectures. So in a way, this Moneyval evaluation to Latvia definitely help us to conduct such activities and to achieve such milestones, otherwise would not be possible. So this political will to act is like, and viewing it from outside is like, when you are being evaluated, you view it like whether, and you really put in effort to show how much you can do. The financial sector, indeed, I definitely can say that the lessons we learned in 2018 helped 652 days ago to be ready and vigilant with the realities that were put forth in the financial sector. So one of the most important things, what is international community worried about, and also other players in the financial sector, it's been this flow from the east, flow funding from the east, and I wouldn't say only through Latvia, but including through Latvia. It went for the Russian oligarchs to be able to strengthen their positions with their real estate, and maybe they wanted to take care for, if there is a situation in Russia, they would still have access to the funding that was taken out of Russia. They wanted to hide it and hide actually what is going on in Russia with these vast corruption instances, and then the Russian officials really wanted to retain the possibility of accessing it. So 652 days ago, there was readiness, considering what risks were present here. Risks were reduced. We don't want to go back to that at all. And also a control system, cooperation on national level and internationally allowed us to freeze the funding insufficient amount, also reacting to trade sanctions, which is not typical financial sector business, but still we did consult the clients, and well, the financial sector did also explain what to do to commercial entities. So any such test, if you are not used to, and it's a new situation to you, you need to understand, and you want to understand what to do next now. But we need to understand that everyone has improved their options, and they are now successful in their tests, and they have still things to improve. And I guess they are going to graduate and achieve this main objective of the sector, and fight corruption. Well, globally, and we look, there are good examples. Also, maybe other countries could be learning from Inese in a broader arena, then, if we can say so, the fight with the sanctions and oligarch money. In this context, we just heard about Latvian examples. Maybe it's a broader comment.
Latvijai ir daudz.
Thank you and good afternoon. Latvia has many individual good examples that we can share and that we do share, but maybe it slightly differs from what our honorable guest Oliver said, that Latvia is small enough to be a part of the problem and not big enough to be a part of the solution. Yes, we cannot be a part of the solution alone, but together with larger and stronger bodies, we can be a part of the solution. For example, in the register of enterprises, we have a beneficial owner register that is quite clear, quite transparent, maybe due to the efforts of Gunnar Paidere, the former person in charge. She started speaking about that, and UK was one of the first that signed, and Ukraine was the next. But then we have to ask to how far we have managed to go. And now this Latvian example was asked by the EU to be conveyed to problematic countries, starting from Panama to Oman. Latvia alone, I don't think, unless they ask us, I don't think we'll be able to go and tell them what to do. But EU, which is a huge donor, can influence these situations, and maybe they will listen to the EU. So this is one of the things that demonstrates what we can, and also amount of action that we can take to have a positive impact on the world, so that we would not feel like a drop in the ocean. What concerns these registers, like the beneficial owner register, a year ago there was a judgment by the European Court of Justice, and then many countries historically closed these registers, as far as we saw in Transparency International, and there were still 2 countries that have these registers open. And from the point of view of Transparency International, this is a very good and excellent example. There are many open data available in Latvia in comparison to many other EU countries, and there we also have good results. Inese just built a bridge to my next question. So what are specific examples that we could use to learn from another countries, or we would like other countries to learn from us, because we believe this is the best standard? Maybe we should look at that from this point of view as well. Matis, what concerns good examples? The first that comes to my mind, what concerns financial crime, is cooperation to prevent these crimes, to combat these crimes, and not only crimes of corruption, but financial crimes in general. Quite often you have a puzzle of 1,000 pieces and you just have 15 in your case, and you don't know what is going to be the general picture, overall picture. And only when you come together, when you share information and share experience, only then you can put the puzzle together. In this regard, Latvia has a very good tool, a very good mechanism that we can be proud of, which is called the Public Partnership Program, which is created at the FAU, and it is also widely used in corruption cases, and law enforcement bodies are actively using it. Also, the so-called subjects of the law are engaged, and they cooperate with the FIU where and when needed, and also with the anti-corruption bodies. And this also pertains to the strategic level. We have worked together to improve the corruption prevention system. We had a project approximately 2 years ago, where the 4th largest Latvian credit institutions, FIU, responsible department from the prosecutor's office, and also the
stāstījām
Corruption Prevention Office, we came together.
Kāda ir
We
mūsu
told our specific features about our processes and how we notice these cases, how we analyze these cases, and how we prepare the respective materials that are published on our homepage, on the FIU homepage. There are very many valuable materials published, made available on the FIU homepage. I really recommend to read on dark winter evenings before you go to bed. So, but I don't know what the result will be. Maybe you'll be scared and will not be able to fall asleep. Financial Institutions Association, what can you say? What could be these good examples from Latvia? I would recommend to read these materials in chronological order. Then your sleep will be quite good.
Politiskās sadarbības līmenis, kāds bija brīdī,
But what concerns good examples, I would like to mention the level of political cooperation when these changes were introduced. Of course, there was this pressure that contributed, but the scope of these changes would not be possible if there was no one single horizontal goal, because on a daily basis, maybe this is not the main focus of attention. And, people would say like, this is my competence and that is not my competence, and it would be quite difficult to achieve the common target. But in our case, it was very quickly and it was very efficient starting from 2018, when the total rewind, total upgrade of our financial system took place. We had to start working on this together instead of just staying in our own box. We supported each other. We supported the performance of other functions as well. The public-private partnership and the private-private partnership that was mentioned before is also a great example, because due to the legal framework, we can provide more accurate information to the law enforcement bodies and provide accurate information. Banks actually can be a part of operative cases and can provide information that can help law enforcement bodies in these proceedings. But with reference to the UK, we have taken over the system from Jēkabs model in UK, and this has served as a good foundation for our success story. Also, the beneficial owners register was decisive in applying sanctions, because we could immediately identify companies owned by sanctioned persons. In absolute majority of states, this is not possible. It basically depends only on the ability of the bank, but we could do that on a much wider scope, and we could get this information from any public registers. When we worked on creating this register, the public accessibility was of critical importance, because we learned from the UK register, and so verification did not take place. Public availability was a huge benefit. So there is Mickey Mouse or Stalin there registered as a beneficial owner. You can clearly see that, and you know that you should not work with this company, and you don't want to have this company as your partner. Probably UK colleagues could confirm that this was the case, and the sector could react. Fight against financial crime is not related only to the legal aspects. It also involves business logics. And we have spoken about that from the moment when the sanctions were applied. The scope and the level of sanctions against Russia and Belarus, this is not done just for political reasons. We know that the political situation in Belarus and Russia is not business-friendly. And according to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we really have to carefully consider what we should continue, in what way we should continue to cooperate with Russia, except maybe for humanitarian aid. But in general, a continuation of any business with Russia is threat.
citām valstīm mēs gribētu, lai
Threat in general, Inese, maybe what you would want other countries to learn from us, and then considering international cooperation, maybe to which countries you would bring these good examples. To succeed, the countries should be receptive, it should be open. I think our first target would be international bodies that can set the rules of the game. My experience during the last 25 years working in Delna and working on international level demonstrates that each country, maybe except the US, that usually is a trendsetter in many areas. But they also succeed because they can adopt laws that will affect people in the entire world. Because the companies want to enter the New York Stock Exchange, people want dollars, companies want to transfer dollars. So American laws work. But otherwise, international bodies, and it has never been easy. OECD convention on this very logical thing, this anti-corruption, this corruption crime could be, for example, prosecuted by Sweden for the bribery in Latvia. 25 years ago, this was not so easy. For example, OECD companies could enter their bribes in their accounting records. Of course, not calling bribes, but like facilitation payments or whatever. And we had to fight to make sure that this is not possible because they claim these as their costs. And I think OECD conventions are really great in this regard. This actually made such a change possible. But then, of course, there was a fight to implement it, including countries like UK and France and elsewhere. This involves effort. We have to transform these good examples into principles. So it's very important to speak about split this huge elephant into smaller parts. If we speak about international crime and corruption and so on, so that involves investigation, open business conduct, and so on. So we have to look at this at local level, at international level, and demand that these principles are implemented. The progress is huge because countries, of course, not really willingly, but do change. Inese said that we should speak about the future, but we can become optimistic if we see how things have changed during the last 25 years. The OECD convention is almost 25 years old. But, for example, everyone remembers the Latvian corruption case. 3 million were stolen from the country. And in between, there was an Liechtenstein solicitor Longano registered in Liechtenstein. And it was a very difficult case, and the prosecutor's office could not really deal with this that well. And eventually they sent the legal assistance request. And eventually the Swiss court, because that was a Swiss solicitor, the Swiss court decided that his lawyer privilege is more important than the Latvian investigation. Then, of course, there were Lemberg's case and other cases and international cases, huge international cases, where Switzerland had to change its approach. And now we are in one system with investigators who can call and tell and catch this money in the process. It's clear that the law enforcement will always find this difficult because fraudsters are always more agile. We have to see how to follow. There were times when prosecutors' office were not able to catch this money, so to say,
diena pret nakti.
And Knab was waiting for the money to be transferred to Estonia to catch it or to stop it. And things have radically changed. I call this anti-corruption 3.0. And to be able to prevent corruption, we have to deprive the corrupt officials or corrupt persons of all possibilities. And this is a part of our efforts against corruption. And that's why I think it's so good that we have these good examples. If there are any questions online or in person, please do not hesitate to ask our questions. We have one question here. It is a question, and then Inese is a co-chairman in the party called Kustība par, still there. And there is also association PLI. And this panel is called a fight of Western democracies against corruption, and also Russia is mentioned, and sanctions are mentioned, and of course there were many discussions. But let's say we have one Latvian citizen called Piotrs Avens or Pēteris Avens, who received his citizenship under very strange circumstances, but no signs of corruption or no proof of corruption was found. And Edgars Jaunups, former politician, was actively engaged in this case. And that's why we have eventually this very interesting, so to say, citizen. So, but maybe you can comment on this case. Because for 2 years we have had this discussion, how can he still live in a manor in Latvia, manage his properties? How is it possible that he can give interviews, and where the journalist writes that, he is so open to discussions and we agreed about all the questions, but somehow I have never managed to get through to him. And then there will be a premiere of a movie soon where he is presented as someone who has left Russia. Yes, Edgars Jaunups and his friends created this problem some time ago, but we have this problem. How can we tell that we will give this best experience examples, and then we provide these examples? If we have this sanctioned billionaire here who claims to have left this horrible city of London where he could not live so well anymore. As our citizen, he's here, and it's not really clear what means he uses to pay for that and how we apply sanctions to him. As a journalist who have studied this, although I haven't done that during the last few months, but it has always been interesting for me. How is this possible? Maybe this is no burden for this person.
Varbūt izskaidrot mums kopumā šo te situāciju. Kā tad ir?
Varbūt varam paķēdīt. Es varu iesākt un
So, well, I will begin, and the colleagues can then supplement what I will say. So, financial sanctions are aiming at funding, not to get to funding the war in Ukraine. Sanctions against a private entity, a person, for them not to be able to sell the property and redirect or transfer the means to fund war. What it means? It means it does not mean that there's like a big lock on some kind of a building and you cannot enter the building, the specific home, the house, the real estate, and that you could do not actually somehow get the funding to Pēteris Avens. Then what can financial institutions do? I mean, well, okay, I will not comment, and usually as law enforcement I represent the association, so I will not comment on particular issues, just with particular examples. But the sanctions, in essence, it's not about not allowing a person to live. And so the disclaimer, the payments can only be possible if it is with competent institution authorization. For physical entities, then in this case, it is given like for first necessities, food, health care, children care, etc. Like there's a range, and Latvian financial institutions very strictly obey to these laws, sometimes even twice they are asking for confirmation that everything is done correctly. But if you have suspicion that they have more funds available or on more scope than it is necessary, this is evasion of sanctions. So law enforcement needs to be informed. So from the point of view of financial flows, they can access the funds, but this is definitely limited. And what I wanted to also add, and again, stepping away from this particular example, we should be more critical regarding the reputation issues in general. Also in everyday life, like we have spoken about cooperation with Russia or continuing cooperation, even if there has been such. Well, again, you have to critically assess, are we, then is it, and how do we support what kind of oligarchs, and is it what they do? Because there are activities we want to conduct really, and the people that should be thinking, meaning the entities, they should think twice whether to work with someone or someone indirectly linked to certain oligarchs, etc. Like I don't know, these hunting examples and glorification. Well, I was just explaining why. For example, this was the case in Ukraine before 2014, because it glorifies, for example, these people, and this is what they did. They actually did it for their reputation. And now, if we are a smarter society and we are not going to celebrate it anymore, these trophies and everything, then maybe in our society, such cases will be ever less. Because when we, for example, there's a fine for driving, I mean, this reply also already directs us to the next this phase of conversation, especially about the education, youth education, promotion, in informing. So not only do we have to promote compliance with law regulations, but also the reputation question. And now, actually, we are nearing the end of the conference and this discussion. So there was a question about Santa Claus. It is time of Christmas, children writing letters and cards, and what I have observed in practice also, they are telling some wishes. So looking at honorable discussions today, also looking into the topics today you covered and you work with, what do we do with this? Like, what do you wish for Latvia and Western society? What can we do more actively to reduce the impact of oligarchs and this toxicity? So what would you like to wish from Santa Claus and send it to Santa Claus? International institutions. So this is one part. Another is work to achieve something. Oftentimes it's like from above, from below, from the bottom, reviewing certain actions, activities, which not allows us to go away from, in Bill Bauder's work for Magnitsky Act and making it international. And well, this is a good proof that no detail is, well, that every detail is important. And this wishful card of Christmas, I will take it to European Union, to the European Union, to the institutions working on sanctions. And when the war started, we were prepared, and in various factors we were, not maybe with boats and ships, but also that we understood very quickly what's going on. But it was actually difficult to manage it all. That is what it was. It was labor intense, a lot of effort. We needed to collect data. the data was not that good, not that well managed, and the sanction application, we see what Europe does, and it is, I think it's already 12th package of sanctions now. Yes, it's going to be the 12th package already. And yet it does not have an effect which we would really desire. So I want this bag of good things, actually, and I will be going to the European Union and ask there. Well, I can only agree and join that on the part of European Union, we need to do work, criminalize evasion of sanctions, financial sector. Would also like to see that otherwise we're actually like trading jurisdictions, quote unquote, where it is more, or bargaining about that, where it is more economically feasible to be corrupt or conduct certain activities. So, and also from sectors, I really think that I would wish for economic growth. It is difficult to say people that it's not good to accept gifts, it's not good to bribe, and you have to condemn your neighbor, etc. But the situation of the person then is such that they don't understand, or they are in bad economic state. So, but on the higher level than finance sector policy, we have to harmonize it in such a way that it has to work with other policies. We see it gradually becoming true, and we can stabilize it even more, attract investment from the countries, also from other countries, and we are oriented towards that. And we should orient ourselves towards the countries that do not support Russia, that do not work with Russia and Belarus. So this is how we can, we need to be sure that this system works and in a very good way, and there will not be any contradictions, mutual contradictions between these actions and expectations. FIU, well, landing on the Latvian situation maybe more, it's clear that a regional financial center, which we were in 2013 and in 2014, and actually in 2017, we are not anymore today. And this, what now, well, corruption generated money laundering local, and what there is most topical in this topic is the perception. What is the scope? What is the size of corruption? And it is significant. And on the operational level, on the level of law enforcement institutions, what we receive from private sector and their reports, FIU what receives, and the Corruption Prevention and Combating Bureau receives, it is definitely a completely different amount and scope. And once again, wishing for the future, definitely and I wish really for us to not only be reactive to the information we receive, but proactive, be smart, and be able to cooperate among ourselves to increase the exposure, transparency regarding the local corruption and international cooperation, which is a even bigger challenge in itself. And so then there is another question for participants. When they applied for this conference, we asked them questions, and many registered participants then asked how small countries and corruption risks, if we, in Latvia, for example, are we not actually exposed more to these corruption risks than the rest of the world? And does it maybe mean that we cannot fight it that successfully and that good, because we see also this all becomes global, and then assessing this global threat? Then in short, what is the situation of Latvia being small country and its situation, and what opportunities it has standing against the corruption, which becomes ever more international? From the part of financial, field, it's not about how good you are. It is how you proportionally apply the efforts. Well, so basically down from the top, which we actually heard in the discussion about the commercial entities. We need to be able to combat it on all our levels. I think, well, we are relatively smaller, and the consequences are potentially thus more dangerous, because money laundering and turnover of this money in the society has negative impact, adverse effects on policy quality, well-being, etc. Well, we are small, and this impact will be very quickly, can become very, very bad. I have two things, and they just collided with one another in my head, and then they went away somewhere. But look at Luxembourg. You were, for example, Luxembourg laundering as much as it can. Nobody's looking at it so much, or maybe in Corruption Prevention Bureau indexes, we see, well, not to say even about London being the most corrupt. I mean, well, it being just this this nest for corruption. I mean, our reputation, Latvia, has been bad, and it's like a tail coming with us. And you maybe feel it also in your work, but everything has changed. But everything has changed technically, but the reputation persists. What is important, where we can improve our reputation, and what should we do is, I think, also, thank you for mentioning political party co-chair, the political will, the political reputation. In a month, there is new corruption index stagnating in Latvia for several years already, for 7, I think. There, we will be able to see maybe more thoroughly in this index, and what we really want, what is pushing us back and where we are way worse is for institutions and for law is where is in the field of political risks and political risk corruption. This indicator has not changed. We have had the governments which were oligarch-free for a while, but the assessors did not change the evaluation. The risk remains. And the risk which is still coming from this beautiful place where this hotel reads and oligarch talks, and this brutal way how in Latvia the policy making was conducted and everything it influenced and everything we just discussed, and in your field, it is something that current politicians have to consider. It is a long-term work, and you will not be able to do and fight it all like at once, and this should be sent for the possibility of improving and better signals. Something has to happen. We have talked for 4 hours on how to reduce corruption, on how to mitigate these threats for national and global security. However, we will meet in a year and most probably continue this conversation. Inese already mentioned another regular corruption perception indexed publication will be on the 30th of January on 180 countries, usually Transparency International down in Latvia, then publishes the results. And then we look at what we see, and are we more hopeful or more pessimistic on the future and future tasks. Thus far, then, thank you very much for everyone in organizing this event and in participating in this event, and also for being present, those who were present. It is a big community, and this community then is ready to fight for our community to act in a more good faith manner. And Merry Christmas.